The survival mind. Why fear keeps dominating us. You enter a room and something seems strange. There's no noise, no threat, just a sensation in the stomach, a tension, a signal. Your conscious mind has not seen anything, but something older inside has. Is the survival mind. The oldest part, the one that evolved before language, laws, or logic. It does not care about happiness. It does not seek the truth. It only wants one thing, to not die. You have inherited it. We have all inherited it. A system of reflexes and instincts perfected over millions of years before society, before civilization, before memory. In its day, it kept you alive in jungles, deserts, and forests. And now it lives in your body, watching, waiting for danger. But the world for which it was created has disappeared. There are no predators in the supermarket. There are no rival tribes waiting in the next town. And yet, your heart keeps accelerating when someone raises their voice. Your body tenses at criticism. Your thoughts spin after shame, rejection, humiliation, as if your life were in danger, because for the survival mind it is. It does not distinguish between an emotional and a physical threat. It responds to both in the same way. Tunnel vision, adrenaline, accelerated thoughts, frozen speech, fight, flight, paralysis, submission. You think you're exaggerating, but your body is not. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, but in the wrong era. This mismatch is everywhere. Your fear of public speaking, your instinct to conform, your panic when you're alone too long, it all comes from an era in which exile meant death, in which attention meant a threat, in which standing out made you vulnerable. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're old. And the survival mind does not care about your goals. It does not care about your dreams. It only asks, is it safe? And if the answer is no, even for reasons that seem insignificant, it sounds the alarm. But here is the most disturbing part. It will always sound the alarm a bit early, because it has evolved to value false alarms more than missed ones. It is better to be scared by shadows than not see the real monster. It is better to panic and live than to be calm and die. So it protects you by scaring you. It loves you in the only way it knows, assuming that everything wants to kill you, and it does so with good intention. But sometimes, to grow, you will have to thank it and then do what you must. Because survival was only the beginning. Once the body was safe, evolution asked us for something more. Something stranger, more reckless, something that risked everything just to create something new. It is no longer about staying alive. It is about transmitting the spark, the instinct of reproduction. Why we risk everything to be remembered. You fall in love. You yearn for someone. You flirt. You suffer. You spin around another person as if gravity shifted. And in those moments, it doesn't feel like biology. It feels like poetry, destiny, something sacred. But beneath that pain is something ancient. The reproductive instinct isn't expressed with words. It whispers in sensations. It paints beauty on faces and signals on hips, on smiles and symmetry. It hijacks your attention, diverting your logic. It does not care about compatibility. It does not care about peace. It only wants one thing, to create more life. And not just any life. Your genes, your patterns, your history transmitted to the next generation. That's why people risk everything for love. That's why kingdoms were built and destroyed by attraction. That's why we dress with status, humor, and charisma. That's why rejection hurts so much, not only emotionally, but existentially, because on a certain level, not being loved feels like being erased. The instinct of reproduction is powerful because it disguises itself. It doesn't feel like an order. It feels like a yearning. We pursue beauty, thinking it's a personal taste. But our preferences are shaped by ancestral signals, signs of health, fertility, strength, survival. And we tell ourselves that we are choosing. But most of the time, we are responding to signals that we do not consciously understand, to instincts that were established before our ancestors could speak. But there is another layer, because this impulse isn't just about mating. It is about legacy. We want to be remembered, to leave a mark, to be important after we're gone. Some people do it through children, others through art, power, ideas, influence. We all want to resonate beyond our body. And the reproductive impulse also takes advantage of it. It promises immortality, not through the gods, but through biology, through the gaze of a child with your eyes, through the survival of something that once lived inside you. But also deceives us. It makes us believe that love is eternal, that chemistry is connection, that obsession is meaning. It pushes us into relationships that burn quickly and with intensity and leave scars. It convinces us that desire equals destiny. It is not always, because this part of the brain does not care if we are happy. It only cares that we reproduce. And yet, even knowing it, we keep falling. We keep pursuing because the reproductive instinct is not only in our body. It is in our myths, in our music, in our madness, in our poetry. It is the reason why we risk breaking our heart again and again. And beneath all that, there is something even more addictive. It is not the person nor the act, but the chemical that makes us desire everything. Dopamine, the engine of desire. Why do we pursue instead of holding on? You receive a new message, a like, a notification, or flirtation. Your heart jumps a little. A flash of emotion, a burst of energy, a reason to worry again. You're not even sure why it matters, yet it matters. That is dopamine. It is not the chemical of pleasure, but that of the search. It does not reward you for having. It rewards you for wanting, for chasing, for striving, for reaching, for the feeling of being about to get it. Dopamine is the engine that drives every obsession, every displacement, every game, every new crush, every great idea, every imminent goal. It is not about satisfaction. It is about anticipation. The euphoria before the prize, the promise that something incredible is just a step away. And once you understand that, everything changes, because dopamine does not care what you chase. It is activated whether it is about love or power, validation or revenge, sugar or success. It only says go ahead. And we do. We chase things we do not need. We want things we cannot understand. We get caught in search patterns, even when the prize is empty, because the impulse itself feels like purpose. The brain learns quickly, and once it finds a loop that rewards the search, it repeats again. Social networks, shopping, gambling, alcoholism, romance, the illusion that one more scroll, one more click, one more attempt will finally complete the circuit. But completion is not goal, because the moment you get what you want, dopamine levels drop. Satisfaction is ephemeral. Achievements fade. What was so important yesterday begins to seem insignificant, and you start searching again, not because you are greedy or because you are broken, but because you are made that way. And that served us in its time. When food was scarce, danger constant, and goals immediate. We had to keep going, keep solving, keep wanting. Those who stayed behind died. Those who went hungry survived. Now we live in a world of abundance, and hunger is still there. So we chase more followers, more money, more beauty, more novelties, more stimuli, more. But this is the truth. Dopamine doesn't tell you that. It never ends. It never arrives. It only advances. One desire after another. A fantasy that collapses in reality only to give rise to another. And the cost. We forget how to be with what we have, because there is something terrifying in standing still, in resting in satisfaction, in not needing to chase anything. But we will get to that. First, let's see what happens when the pursuit fails, when you do not get what you want and something inside breaks. The pain of loss versus joy of gain. Why fear wins. You find $20 on ground. Unexpected. Easy. They are yours. You smile. You feel lucky for a moment. The day is brighter. Now imagine you lose $20. The same amount disappears from your pocket without warning. The frustration, anger, pain of carelessness, or bad luck. Which moment is more intense? For almost everyone, it is the loss. This is the mind's asymmetry. Its silent, irrational inclination towards fear. We are programmed to feel loss more intensely than gain, to remember pain more than joy, to react more strongly to threats than opportunities. And it makes sense, because evolution did not care if you were happy. It cared that you were alive. Losing a gain meant disappointment. Dodging a threat meant death. Therefore, Our brain developed an alert system that sounds louder in the face of danger than in the face of pleasure. We overreact to losses. We hold grudges longer than we appreciate compliments. We are frightened by setbacks and downplay advances. We worry more about what we could lose than what we might build. And that determines much of what we do. Why we hesitate, why we conform, why we cling, why we don't start a project, confess the truth, or take the leap. Because the fear of loss is greater than the promise of gain. This fear is ancient and not only emotional, but mathematical. In studies, people always demand more than double the reward to take the same risk they would avoid for fear of losing. So we negotiate with security. We look for guarantees. We stay small because pain has sharper teeth than the wings of joy. But the cost of that inclination is invisible. The dreams not attempted, the connections not expressed, the versions of ourselves that could have emerged if we weren't so afraid of falling. Loss hurts more than gain heals. And our lives are shaped by that imbalance. We create complete belief systems to soften the blow. We tell ourselves that we never really wanted what we lost. We rewrite our memories to defend ourselves from regret. We bury the longing under rationalizations, because the alternative of facing what could have been is too raw. Thus, fear becomes wisdom, caution becomes identity, and the joy of gain becomes something we admire from afar as we shudder at the cost. But the survival mind is not the only part of us that has evolved, because deep inside the body, there are other more primitive, more visceral instincts designed not only to protect us from death, but from corruption itself. The reflex of disgust. Why some things must be rejected instantly. You see something rotten. A smell hits you before thought arrives. Your face twists. Your stomach churns. Something in your body decides no, even before your mind has words. That is disgusting. It is not just a reaction, it is a limit. A line drawn instantly between what belongs and what must be expelled. The reflection of disgust evolved to protect us from bad food, from diseases, from contamination that we still could not understand. Before science, we had nausea. Before hygiene, we had repulsion. But disgust did not stay in the kitchen or forest. It moved inward. It became moralized. It adhered to behavior, to people, and identities. We were not only saying that was dirty, we were saying that you are. And suddenly, the same reflection that helped us avoid diseases became a weapon, a justification, a way of dehumanizing, excluding, exiling. Because once something is labeled repugnant, logic no longer matters. Empathy shuts off. The conversation ends. That is the power of disgust. It bypasses reason. It annuls nuances. It feels fair, immediate, pure. It tells us that we are protecting something. Our bodies, our families, our culture, our soul. But often it protects us from change. Because disgust does not question itself. It does not evolve on its own. And the things that seem disgusting to us are rarely universal. They are taught, inherited, conditioned. What is repugnant to one culture can be sacred in another. What now horrifies you may have seemed natural at another time. And that is what makes this reflection so dangerous, because disgust is perceived as truth. But often it is nothing more than fear disguised as urgency. We reject difference, aging, disability, poverty, the things that remind us of what we fear becoming. We say dirty when we want to say uncomfortable. We say bad when we want to say strange, and sometimes we even turn it toward ourselves. We look at our own bodies, our own thoughts, our past, our mistakes, and we feel repugnance not for the world, but for ourselves, as if being imperfect meant being dirty, as if imperfection deserved exile. But you're not a pollutant. You're not a stain. You are human. And to survive, evolution gave us more than repulsion. It gave us the need to connect, to belong, to be considered worthy. Because the most dangerous thing in a tribe was not being sick, it was being expelled. Status equals survival. Why? We cannot stop comparing. You enter a room and instantly, without wanting to, you analyze its hierarchy. Who has confidence? Who is admired? Who is ignored? You look at the clothes, posture, and the tone of voice. Not to judge, but to situate yourself. Higher or lower, better or worse. You do it even when you don't want to. Because long before social networks, the institute and office politics, status meant survival. In early human groups, status determined everything. Who got food? Who obtained protection? Who could speak? Who stayed? Having a low status was not only shameful, it was dangerous. The marginalized ate last. The marginalized were left alone when predators arrived. And so we evolved to worry deeply, desperately. That's why shame burns so much. That's why humiliation endures. That's why approval is like oxygen. Because your brain still believes status is security. That ascending means living longer. That falling risks dying. But in the modern world, the game never ends. And the rules keep changing. Now status has little to do with hunting or shelter. It has to do with aesthetics, follower count, professional titles, intelligence, morality, victimhood. Even humility becomes a bargaining chip. It is not enough to be. You have to be seen, and preferably seen winning. And that craving for visibility, recognition, admiration, and relevance drives us more than we admit. It shapes our careers, our relationships, and beliefs. We choose sides not only for the truth, but to belong. We show our values not only to live them, but to be above those who do not have them. And when someone threatens our status, disagrees, eclipses us, or despises us, we feel it as an attack, not on the ego, but on our identity, on our own survival. That's why rejection hurts so much. Why does envy poison in silence? Why do even small slights resonate more than praise? The survival mind does not distinguish between equals and a pack of predators. It only perceives the change and panics. That is why we constantly compare ourselves, not because we are vain, but because we are programmed to measure where we are. Because somewhere inside us, there's a voice that whispers to us, do not stay behind. Don't let them forget you. Don't let them exclude you. But the truth is that the game cannot be won because status is a moving target. A changing shadow, a ladder that extends upwards without end. You climb one step and see 3 more above. And you keep climbing. But not all hunger is for approval. Some yearnings run deeper. Beyond the social, beyond the surface, in the quiet spaces where something inside you seeks more than anyone can give. Hunger beyond the body. Why do we yearn for what we cannot touch? You eat, you rest, you survive another day. The body is calm. The needs are covered. And still you feel that something pulls at you. A kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. A yearning, a concern. Something is missing and you don't know what. It is hunger beyond the body. It is not physical, but existential. A yearning that does not disappear after breakfast or sleep. A space in our interior that does not respond to comfort. Because it is not about surviving. It is about finding meaning. We are appetizing creatures, but not only for calories or security. We yearn for attention, beauty, novelty, love, status, impact, transcendence. And even when we get those things, hunger remains. Because what we're looking for is not outside us. It is a feeling, a moment of fullness, of feeling seen, of being important in a way we cannot exactly define. And that is why we pursue it in symbols, in trophies, in achievements, in the gaze of others, in stories that we tell ourselves about why we're important. This hunger builds civilizations and burns people. It is the fuel of ambition and addiction. The reason we move, strive, and wear ourselves out. We want more than enough. We want something more. Something that tells us that we are not only alive, but important. And we live in a world that knows how to briefly feed that hunger. Algorithms, products, promises, experiences, all of them designed to awaken the yearning, all of them designed to tell us that fullness is just one step away. A click, a goal, a transformation. But never lasts. Because the hunger beyond the body is not meant to be fed. It is destined to drive us. It is the part of us that refuses to be satisfied, that goes beyond comfort, that dreams, explores, and creates. It is what drives art, wonder, and rebellion. The pain that tells us that there is more than breathing. But that pain can turn against us. Because if we believe that it must be satisfied, if we confuse hunger with a problem to be solved, we live in a loop of effort, of infinite dissatisfaction, of measuring our lives by what we still lack. And we forget something crucial. This hunger did not evolve by accident. It was placed there not to keep us happy, but to keep us moving, searching, expanding, building not only bodies but copies, echoes, replicas. Because under all our yearning, there is a deeper engine. And it does not care if we are happy. It only cares that something of us survives. Are we just vehicles for genes when the purpose isn't yours? You wake up. You plan your day. You make big and small decisions. You believe that they are yours, guided by thought, shaped by your values. You tell yourself that you are living your life. But what if you're not the driver? What if you are the vehicle and something older is at the wheel? Evolutionary biology does not see you as the center. It sees your genes. And from that perspective, everything that you are, your strength, your charm, your fear, your desire, is nothing more than a strategy for replication. Your body is a carrier, your mind a tool, your decisions a means for an end that is not conscious, but absolute. Richard Dawkins called it the selfish gene, not because genes feel greed, but because they act as if they do. They replicate. You are a descendant of survivors, of replicators, of winners in a race that nobody remembers running. And your sense of self, that could just be the interface, an easy-to-use illusion created by biology to keep the machine moving forward. It is efficient. It works. It gives you meaning, joy, suffering, purpose. It gives you enough narrative to move forward. But beneath that narrative, there is a code. And the code does not care if you feel fulfilled. It cares if you reproduce. It cares if your copies thrive. Your creativity, your depression, your empathy, your rage, all of that could be side effects of a deeper algorithm. But here comes the strange thing. Even if that is true, even if we are only genetic strategies wrapped in self-awareness, there is something in us that knows it, that resists, that asks questions genes do not need us to ask. What if I don't want to have children? What if I reject tradition? What if I dedicate my life to art, to stillness, or revolution? What if I say no to replication and yes to something else? And that tension, the rebellion of consciousness against the code, could be the most human thing in us. Because whether you're a vehicle or not, a voice behind the wheel insists on driving. Even if the road was already built for you, the illusion of control. Why do we pretend that the reign is ours? You double-check the lock. You update the email. You make a list. Then another. You plan your steps, your week, your future. And beneath all that, there is a silent belief that if you do everything right, things will turn out as you want. But control is a story we tell ourselves to feel safe. It is the illusion that effort guarantees the result. That preparation avoids chaos. That life is a machine and we are in command. But life is not a machine. It is time. They are the waves. It is something you can navigate, but never control. Even so, we seek control because uncertainty is unbearable. Not knowing is like a weakness. We prefer to cling to the illusion rather than admit how much does not depend on us. And that illusion is reinforced. When our actions work and planning leads us to success, we believe it is proof that we are in command, of which the system makes sense. But we forget luck, timing, invisible factors we never saw. Control comforts, but also traps us. Because when things go wrong, we blame ourselves. We look for the error. We go over the idea that we skipped a step or failed to comply with a rule. The illusion turns against us. What before made us feel powerful now makes us feel guilty. And what is worse, we try to control others, their decisions, emotions, the opinion they have of us. As if the right words, the right action, and the right mask were going to make people behave as we want. But people change all the time. And trying to stop it is like trying to steal wind. We micromanage, obsess, say yes when we want to scream. We play roles that we hate only to maintain the appearance that everything is fine, and it works until it stops doing so, because life always destroys illusions. A diagnosis, betrayal, loss that you could not avoid, and suddenly the scaffolding collapses and you are left with truth. You never had control. You never directed the storm. But maybe that is not weakness. Maybe it is freedom. Because when you stop trying to control everything, you start participating. You face life as it is, not as you would like it to be. You respond instead of ordering. You breathe instead of tensing. But that only works if you're able to recognize the fear that is underneath. Because control has never had to do with power. It has had to do with protection. And in such an uncertain world, the deepest part of us keeps scanning, keeps going back, keeps preparing for what might go wrong. Programmed for danger. Why security never seems enough. You check the locks again. You repeat the conversation. You imagine what could go wrong on the way, on the trip, in the future that you have not yet lived. Even when everything is calm, there's a whisper in the back of your mind. What if? It is not paranoia. It is programming. Your brain evolved in a world where danger was everywhere. Predators, famines, injuries, the unknown. Those who ignored the risk did not survive. Those who anticipated the fear, those who were scared by the shadows, transmitted their genes. You are a descendant of the anxious. That is why your nervous system learned to scan, to predict, to prepare. It learned that security is not a state. It is a process of vigilance, a constant awareness that something could go wrong even if everything seems to be fine. That is why peace seems temporary. That is why rest seems deserved but never permanent. That is why you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop even if no noise is heard. Because your body still lives in jungle. It does not care that there are no tigers among the bushes. It reacts to debts, to text messages, to silence, to ambiguity in the same way that it previously reacted to the crackling of a twig in the dark. And the more unknowns are presented to us, the stronger that system becomes. It is not just about great threats. They're the small ones, the social signals, the tone of voice, the unread messages, the micro signals that are perceived as danger, rejection, shame, exile. Your mind may know that you're safe. Your body often does not. That is why fear lives in the stomach, throat, and chest. It is not imaginary. It is biological. A system designed to react before you can even name what is wrong. And in a world flooded with information, the system collapses. Each headline is a threat. Each possibility becomes a source of anxiety. We try to prepare for everything. We think being prepared is synonymous with peace. But peace does not come from knowing the future. It comes from accepting that you cannot. And still, the scanning continues because a part of you believes that if you think enough, fear enough, control enough, you can prevent the pain before it happens, but you cannot. However, that does not make you a disaster. It makes you human. And even if we are programmed for danger, we have also developed something else, something strange, something no predator has ever needed. We have developed the ability to reason. And with it came a new illusion, one that flatters us, but hides how wild we still are. The myth of rationality, why logic rarely commands. You weigh the pros and cons. You gather evidence. You tell yourself that you are being logical, that you're making the best possible decision. But if you look closer, maybe you will see it. The hunch, the emotion, the invisible inclination that preceded reasoning. Because rationality does not mark the way. It cleans after the decisions have already been made. This is the myth of rationality, the comforting idea that we are mostly reasonable creatures who use logic to guide our lives, that our judgments are based on facts and our beliefs are rooted in reason. But the truth is more complex. Most decisions begin in the body, in feelings, in intuition. We want something, we fear something, we intuit something, and then we build a story that makes that feeling seem intelligent. We use logic as a lawyer, not a judge. Not to discover truth, but to defend what we already feel. And it happens faster than we realize. Studies show that we often make moral judgments in milliseconds, and only then build the reasoning that supports them. We believe that we are evaluating when, in reality, we are justifying. We select the facts. We ignore the contradictions. We believe what seems right to us, and we call it reason. And the more intelligent we are, the better we are at this illusion. Because intelligence does not protect us from prejudices, but can make them harder to see. We become experts in rationalizing, in debating, in using logic as a weapon to reinforce emotions. And this is important because we build systems based on reason, politics, justice, and economy. We pretend that human beings are rational actors who make informed decisions. But deep down, we are still tribal, emotional, and fearful. We vote with our identity. We consume with our desires. We argue with our wounds. We believe we are right. Because the rational mind not only deceives others, it deceives even ourselves. It gives us the illusion of control, clarity, and moral superiority. It flatters us, making us believe we are less biased than others. But knowing this isn't defeat. It is humility. Because true wisdom begins when we admit that logic is not a light that we always carry with us, but something to which we must aspire. And to reach it, we must face how we really think. Not with pure logic, but with shortcuts, instincts, and mental patterns that have helped us survive, although often wrong. Heuristics, fast and flawed thinking, are why we err so quickly. You make hundreds of decisions daily. What to eat, to say, where to go, whom to trust. And most times, you don't even realize you're thinking. It's not laziness. They're heuristics, mental shortcuts, patterns, empirical rules that help you move quickly. Because thinking is costly. It requires time, energy, effort, and in a dangerous world, speed meant survival. You couldn't deliberate while something attacked you. Therefore, the brain developed a system prioritizing efficiency over precision. Fill in gaps. Jump to conclusions. Make quick judgments on limited signals. And, in general, it works quite well. You avoid danger. You make decisions. You navigate through life without paralysis by doubts. But the price for speed is distortion. You assume what is familiar is true. The recent is important. What is noisy is relevant. You judge people by their first impressions. You confuse confidence and competence. You see patterns where none exist. Because heuristics do not seek truth. They look for good enough. And good enough helped our ancestors to survive. But in a complex world, those shortcuts backfire. We stereotype. We misinterpret risk. We trust the wrong voices. We vote, spend, argue, and believe based not on logic, but on patterns we feel more than understand. We cross streets without thinking. We assume someone's mood just by looking at them. We take one bad experience and expect it to repeat forever. The brain doesn't stop to double-check. It moves forward as if its first assumption was the only one needed. And what's worse, we aren't aware of it. The shortcut gives us a feeling of clarity. The error seems like certainty. We don't feel the gaps in our reasoning. We simply feel safe. And that false confidence is harder to question than any lie. Because to question it is questioning oneself. And we don't like feeling insecure. We don't like ambiguity. So we protect the shortcut, defend the error, and bury the doubt. But from time to time, something breaks the pattern. A contradiction, failure, a truth that we did not expect. And in that moment, the shortcut falters, the illusion breaks, and something uncomfortable begins to arise. It is not confusion or fear, but conflict, a tension between what we believed and what we can no longer deny. Cognitive dissonance, when your mind refuses to agree with itself. You think you are honest and then lie. You think you are open and then close yourself. You love someone and yet you hurt them. Two things both true that do not fit, and something inside you begins to twist. That twisting is cognitive dissonance. The mental tension unleashed when your actions and beliefs collide. It is the pain of contradiction, the internal friction of living in disagreement with the story you tell yourself about who you are. And your brain hates it because the brain wants consistency, coherence, harmony, a stable image of itself that says, I know who I am. When that image breaks, the discomfort is not only psychological, it is physiological, anxiety, restlessness, that imperious need to resolve the tension. Now, so we do everything possible to alleviate dissonance. We justify. I had no other option. We minimize. It wasn't so bad. We restructure. That's not what really happened. We distort the truth. Not always to deceive others, but to protect ourselves, because the alternative of admitting that we are wrong, that we are imperfect hypocrites, threatens the foundations of our identity. And the stronger the belief, the deeper the dissonance. If you have built your identity around goodness, a single act of cruelty can send you plummeting. If you consider yourself rational, realizing that you have acted out of prejudice or emotions creates a fracture too deep to ignore. So we patch it. We rewrite the memory. Blame others. We reaffirm ourselves. And sometimes we completely change the belief. It's not just something personal. Societies do it. The groups, the institutions. When the truth threatens the collective image, it is buried, denied, or distorted until the narrative seems fluid again. But dissonance is not failure. It is feedback. It means that your values are still alive, that the gap between who you are and who you want to be still matters. And if you can endure the discomfort, if you can maintain the contradiction long enough to examine it, something more will emerge. It is not shame, but growth. Because sometimes the mind doesn't twist to avoid the truth. Sometimes it twists to point it out. And when that happens, we don't protect just our beliefs. We begin to question where they come from and why they always seem so right to us, even when wrong. The confirmation bias. Why you only hear what you believe already. You read an article, watch a video, listen to a story, and something inside nods. Exactly. Think that is what I have been saying all the time. But is it true, or is it just familiar to you? This is confirmation bias. The mind's silent tendency to seek, favor, and remember information that agrees with what we believe already. It feels like learning. It feels like discovery. But more often, it is a mirror, a reflection of the self that we have decided to protect already. And it doesn't happen just in politics or philosophy. It happens in relationships, health, and memory. We look at what confirms us. We overlook what contradicts us. We interpret facts through filters that we don't know we have, because disagreement seems dangerous to us. When someone questions your beliefs, it's not just intellectual. We feel it as an attack on our judgment. Our identity, our group, and the brain, still programmed to survive, defends itself. So we click on stories that validate us. We follow the voices that agree. We surround ourselves with people who reinforce what we think already. Not because we are arrogant, but because we want to feel safe. Certainty reassures us. Doubt shakes us. And little by little, the bubble grows. A world shaped by selective exposure, where everything you see proves that you are right, and everything that doesn't is ignored, ridiculed, or discarded. Not even facts can break it. You think a friend betrayed you, so you focus on late answers, on tone, on forgotten promises. You ignore kindness, explanations, because betrayal fits into the story that your mind has decided already is true. Or you think that a political group is evil, and all its actions, however neutral, are interpreted through that prism. You don't question the headline. You don't see context because your belief is armored already. This bias manifests even in science. Researchers found that people interpret the same evidence differently, depending on their beliefs. Two people can read the same data and come out with more confidence in opposing conclusions. That is not analysis. It is identity protecting itself. In fact, the more solid the evidence against a belief, the more we cling to it. The brain isn't looking for the truth. It seeks coherence. And confirmation bias helps us maintain it, even if it means distorting reality. But it's not just about information. It is about attention, because we remember what we notice, and what we remember becomes our truth. And once a belief forms, it becomes the point of reference, the anchor around which all new data must revolve, even if that anchor is completely wrong. The anchor effect. When the first number controls the game, you go into a store and see a jacket priced at $500 reduced to $200. It seems like a bargain, as if you were saving money. But are you really, or are you just anchored? The anchor effect is one of the simplest and most persistent biases of the brain. It occurs when an initial piece of information, often arbitrary, conditions all subsequent judgments. Even when we know it shouldn't matter, it matters. You hear a salary expectation, a price, a number, a statement, and instantly your mind clings to it. The anchor becomes your point of reference. Even if it doesn't make sense, you negotiate from it, compare it, evaluate new information through it. You don't realize it, but your perception has changed silently, subtly, and powerfully. It manifests everywhere. A $200 bottle of wine appears on a menu next to another of 60, and suddenly $60 seems reasonable. A lawyer asks for an absurdly high compensation, knowing that a smaller one will seem fair. A real estate agent first shows you a house that is too expensive, so the next one seems like a bargain. And it's not just about numbers, but about ideas, labels, first impressions. If someone tells you that a person is difficult, you will start to notice their flaws. If you hear a rumor before meeting someone, it sticks with you. Anchors are not just prices. They are frameworks for perception. And they don't have to be true. They just have to appear first. Because once the anchor is placed, everything else is drawn towards it. And the scariest thing is that you almost never realize it's happening. Even experts fall into the trap. Judges are influenced by sentencing suggestions. Doctors are influenced by the number a patient mentions casually. Anchoring is not stupidity. It is the way the brain saves effort. It clings to the first number and builds from there. But that first number can be a trap, a way to control you without force, to bend your expectations before you have the opportunity to form them. And this is important because expectations shape experience. If you think something is expensive, it tastes better. If you think someone is impressive, you overlook their flaws. Anchoring taints everything. So be careful where you let your mind start. Because sometimes the first thought is not just an assumption. It's a leash. And sometimes that leash pushes us towards optimism, towards the belief that things will turn out well, that we will overcome adversities, that, regardless of what the data says, we will be the exception. The optimistic bias. Why we believe we will be the exception. You know the risks. You have read the statistics. You understand that things could go wrong. And yet, you believe that it will not be that way. Not for you. That is optimistic bias. The silent and persistent belief that your future will be better than average, that you will live longer, love better, have more success, and that somehow the probabilities do not apply to you. It is not arrogance, it is innate. This bias isn't a defect of the system. It is the system. Human beings evolved to be slightly delusional, to assume the best even when logic says otherwise. Because hope, however irrational, has kept us moving. If we really processed all the risks, failure rates, and dangers, perhaps we would never act. Optimistic bias gives us courage. It allows us to try again after disappointment. Start new projects after old ones fail. Imagine a better future despite a brutal reality. Without it, perhaps we would survive but not fight. But optimism isn't neutral. It distorts. We underestimate how long things will take, how much they will cost, and how difficult they will be. We expect others will change. We ignore warning signs. We stay in jobs, relationships, or habits much longer than we should because we believe that this time will be different. This manifests in finances, health, and love. We overestimate success and downplay failures. We assume that we will outperform the average even when, by definition, we are average. And when things go wrong, it surprises and confuses us, because our internal prediction model was never quite realistic. It was protective. Optimism protects us from paralysis, but leaves us vulnerable to disappointment. And even knowing it, we keep hoping because hope is addictive. It tastes of possibility. It whispers to you that you are special, that history will twist in your favor, that setbacks are temporary and the next chapter will redeem the pain. Sometimes it is true, but other times the bias has nothing to do with facts or the future. It has to do with narrative. We believe that we will win not because it is likely, but because it's necessary, because the alternative seems unbearable. And so we keep looking forward, building futures in our heads, rehearsing victories before they happen, living not in the moment, but in what's imagined. And that habit doesn't come from fantasy. It comes from something deep within a brain, a trick that we all use, one that allows us to travel in time without leaving our seat, a mental journey through time. That is why we cannot remain present. You are here, but not really. A part of your mind goes back to a moment that haunts you, to a possibility that excites or terrifies, a conversation that you wish was different, a future that you are trying to predict. This is mental time travel, the brain's ability to abandon the present and simulate what was or could be. It is not a defect. It is one of our greatest abilities. We can relive, rehearse, regret, plan, reimagine. It is how we learn from the past and prepare for what is to come. No other species does it like us. It is part of what makes us human. But this gift has a cost, because the past does not change and the future does not arrive as we expect. However, we spend hours, days, revisiting what cannot be fixed and rehearsing what may never happen. We edit memories to soften pain or justify actions. We move quickly towards catastrophe, preparing for events that may never happen. We take refuge in fantasies. We punish ourselves with nostalgia. And in the meantime, the present goes unnoticed. Why do we do it? Because the present is fragile, is full of uncertainty, vulnerability, things we cannot control. The past has clarity even when it hurts. The future has promises even when it scares us, so we ramble and the brain rewards us for it. Imagination illuminates the reward centers. Planning makes us feel prepared. Reliving pain gives us the illusion of control, as if rethinking the same mistake would avoid the next one, as if perfecting the future in our head would protect us somehow. But it is not like that, because no matter how much we rehearse, we cannot guarantee the future. No matter how much you ruminate, you cannot rewrite what you have lived. And even so, we do it, not because we're lost, but because we try to make sense of the story to understand how we have become who we are and predict who we could become. Mentally traveling in time is not a weakness. It is making sense of things, but it can also trap us, because sometimes the trip backwards is not about clarity, but about shame. And sometimes the leap forward is not about hope, but about fleeing. And in both cases, we divert our thoughts not towards the truth, but towards comfort. Because often the past that we remember and the future that we imagine are not reflections. They are justifications, motivated reasonings. When the truth bends to desire, you hear something that contradicts your beliefs, and instantly your mind starts working. Not to understand, but to defend, to find excuses, to look for flaws in the argument, to discard the source, to protect what you already think. That is not logic. It is motivated reasoning. It is the mental process in which our conclusions come first, and then our justifications. We do not reason to find the truth. We reason to preserve a version of the truth that suits us. Because the truth, the real truth, is uncomfortable. It disturbs identity. It threatens belonging. It can leave us exposed, ashamed, or insecure. Therefore, the mind does not seek precision, but comfort. And it does it faster than we think. We form beliefs intuitively, emotionally, and then our intellect builds walls around them. We look for evidence that confirms them. We ignore what is not. We build elaborate arguments that seem objective when in reality, they're scaffolding for something that we already need to be true. This is seen everywhere, in politics, religion, and personal relationships. You think that your partner loves you, so you justify any distance. You think your enemy is cruel, so you see his kindness as manipulation. You believe in a theory, so you dismiss any contradiction as bias. You think your pain is someone else's fault, so you see every neutral action as an attack. You think you're good, so you erase memories that do not support your narrative. You think someone is hopeless, so you deny evidence of their growth. The smarter we are, the better we are at it. Intelligence becomes a tool of rationalization. We do not become less biased. We get better at hiding it from ourselves. And the more personal the subject, the stronger its effect. Because this type of reasoning is protective. It protects us from emotional harm. It allows us to cling to self-esteem, community, and moral superiority. And losing any of those things, admitting that we could be wrong, isn't just humiliating. It can feel like dying. We link our beliefs to our identity, our opinions to our sense of belonging, our certainty to our security. And when those beliefs are questioned, the mind not only debates, but defends who we think we are. So the brain rewrites history, not out of malice, but survival, but there's a cost. Because the more we bend reality to fit our desires, the harder it is to see clearly. We lose touch with nuance, complexity, and the ability to truly change. And even when the facts are in front of us, we reinterpret them, misrepresent them, reframe them until the message is familiar enough for us to believe it. The invisible influence of framing. How the same truth can seem a lie. They tell you there's a 90% chance for success. You relax. It sounds promising. But then you hear the same thing expressed in another way. A 10% chance of failure. And suddenly it seems riskier. Nothing has changed except the frame. Framing is the hidden force that shapes our interpretation of reality. It is not the facts that change our opinion, but how they're presented. The words, the tone, the context. Two people can say the same thing differently, and only one will seem true. We believe we respond to the truth, but we respond to stories. Let's say a treatment saves 90 of 100 lives. It gives hope. Let's say it fails in 10 people. It gives fear. Let's say a candidate supports freedom and you're inclined to vote for them. Let's say he supports eliminating regulations and you walk away. The details have not changed, but the feeling has. Because we don't think in data, we think in emotions. Framing takes advantage of that. It activates biases. It makes small differences seem huge. It can make risks seem safe and safety seem dangerous. It can turn a victim into a suspect, failure into a lesson, a statistic into a story that justifies anything. And it is subtle. The headline of news, the order of options in a survey, the way someone introduces a topic. The first words shape the following 1,000. Because once a framework is set, the mind resists anything that breaks it, no matter how intelligent you may be. If you hear something framed with confidence, clarity, and emotion, you are more likely to believe it, even if false. And once you believe it, everything reinforces it. You stop noticing the framework entirely. It simply feels like reality now. And that is where it becomes dangerous, because framing influences not only opinion. It gives shape to our identity. It tells us who we are, who the enemy is, what to fear, what to want. It builds the lens through which we view the world. But here is a twist. We do not only receive frameworks, we carry them. And sometimes what we see in others has more to do with our own reflection than with the truth we have before us. The distorted projection from the mind's mirror. When you see yourself in others, you get angry at someone. You do not trust them now. You feel judged, rejected, and disrespected. But deep down, the question arises, are they really doing it, or are you? Projection is when the mind confuses its own shadow for the shape of another person. It is not a lie. It is blindness itself. We see parts of ourselves that we do not want to face now. So we project them onto other people, onto strangers, and onto those closest. It starts as defense because admitting what is inside us is painful. Jealousy, insecurity, and selfishness. So instead of assuming it, we accuse now. We criticize them now. We react not to what is real, but to what we cannot bear recognizing in the mirror. Projection distorts all relationships. You assume that someone hates you because you fear they will reject you. You think they manipulate you because you know how to manipulate others. You accuse them of not listening while you refuse to hear what they say. It seems like perception, but it's reaction. And the closer someone is to your hidden wound, the stronger the distortion now. They say something unimportant, and you take it as insult. They take up space, and you feel abandoned now. They do not agree with you, and you feel attacked now. Because in reality, you are not reacting to them, but to yourself only. But projection is not only about guilt now. It is also about admiration too. We idealize people who reflect parts of ourselves that we have buried deep. We fall in love with the potential that we have not dared live out. We envy the traits that we secretly long for now. The mind not only hides what it fears most, it also hides what it longs for most. And so we assign meaning to faces now. We build complete stories around behaviors that we barely understand now. We turn others into receptacles of emotions that we have not yet processed. It is our way of surviving when the awareness of ourselves is too sharp to bear it. But projection keeps us trapped. It limits connection. It blinds us to the truth of others and to the truth about ourselves. Because as long as we see ghosts, we cannot see the person before us. And until we recover those scattered pieces of ourselves, we continue confusing the echoes with the voices and the shadows with the intentions. But there's a voice we trust, one that narrates our world with such fluidity that we rarely question it, one that tells our story even when inventing it on the go. The inner narrator, a voice that is always observing. You enter a room, and there it is. The voice is not heard aloud. It does not shout, but it is ever present, commenting, judging, narrating your steps as if you were a novel's character. It is reading. That is the inner narrator, the invisible narrator that follows you everywhere. It tells you what kind of person you are, what others think, if you're doing well or failing silently. It takes raw experience and turns it into meaning, judgment, identity. And most of the time, you never question it because it does not sound strange. It sounds like you, like truth. But what if it's not? What if that voice is not neutral or even honest? What if it is an echo of all the criticisms you have internalized, of all the standards that you have not met, and all the beliefs that you have absorbed without realizing it, that pretends to narrate reality? But it often narrates your fear. You are saying a word, and it tells you that you are clumsy. They reject you, and it tells you that you are unworthy of love. You win something, and it whispers that you do not deserve it. It does not just describe your life. It edits it. It remembers the wounds. It repeats the tapes of failure over and over again, and sometimes it creates problems out of nowhere just so that the story continues, because stories give us structure, and the inner narrator craves structure more than peace. It wants things to make sense, even if that sense is painful. You believe that it is guiding you, but sometimes it keeps you in place. You believe that it is helping you to grow, but it is often helping you to conform to an outdated image of who you are supposed to be. And since it is always there, you rarely realize how strong it has become until silence becomes unbearable. But here's the strange thing. That voice is not a lie. Not entirely. It is trying to help. It wants to protect you, prepare you, spare you the shame, pain, rejection. It believes that if it can control the narrative, it can control outcomes. But it cannot, because life is not a script. It is chaos, and you're not a static character. You are evolving. Even so, the voice persists because in the depths of your mind, there is something always observing, always commenting, and always trying to maintain control. And sometimes it raises a deeper question when we rarely ask ourselves who exactly is narrating and who is listening. Divided selves. Who is truly in control? You promise yourself you will change. You mean it. You prepare, you plan, you visualize the new version of yourself. And then you do the opposite thing. Why? It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is something older than both conflicts. The mind is not a unified voice. It is a choir, a collection of cells with different objectives, fears, and desires. And sometimes they do not agree. A part of you wants to grow. Another wants security. One wants adventure. Another longs for routine. One advances while the other retreats. And you feel stuck because no part can hold the helm forever. This is the reality of divided selves. You are not a unique and coherent I. You are a changing mixture of identities that arise and disappear depending on the state of mind, the memories, and the environment. The self that sets goals at night is not the self that wakes up tired. The self that forgives is not the self that gets angry again. We change subtly and constantly and act as if that were a problem, as if inconsistency meant that something is wrong. But perhaps inconsistency is simply the truth of the human being. We were not designed to be static, and nevertheless, we expect coherence. We expect all parts of us to agree. We believe that self-control means domination, a voice that governs over the others. But control does not last forever. The part of you that takes control today may lose it tomorrow. So what we do? Most of us choose a version of ourselves and try to silence the rest. We shame our doubts, repress our fears, exile our needs. We pretend to be one thing, clean and simple. But the more we repress, the noisier those hidden parts become until one day they take control. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because the part that you ignore is still alive in you, is still feeling, is still remembering, and will find a way to express itself through hesitation, procrastination, self-destruction, or silence. So the question is not why I cannot be constant. It is what version of self is suffering at this moment. Because when you start listening to the parts that you prefer to avoid, something changes. You begin to see the logic in the sabotage, the wisdom in the fear, the pattern in the chaos, and you realize that the conflict within you is not a rupture. It is a conversation, and sometimes the part that holds you back is not trying to ruin your life, but to protect it. Self-sabotage as security. Why you ruin what you think you want. You get closer to success, and suddenly you stop trying. You enter into a healthy relationship and look for a fight. You start to heal, and then you disappear into old habits. It seems like a failure, but something else is happening underneath. Self-sabotage is not always about laziness or fear of hard work. Sometimes it is about protection, a silent internal logic that says, if I ruin this now, I won't be surprised when it breaks. Because success feels risky. Love feels risky. Vulnerability feels dangerous. And if you have been hurt before, abandoned, ashamed, surprised, then your mind learns a brutal lesson. It is safer to lose alone than to wait and end up shattered. So you pull the trigger before life can. You procrastinate on what matters most. You disappear from the life of someone who finally treats you well. You numb yourself, you withdraw, you sabotage yourself. Not because you want to fail, but because the failure you choose seems better than the betrayal you don't foresee. And the logic is twisted. But it's not stupid, because the brain remembers, catalogs the pain, stores it in the deepest part, and builds defenses around it. And sometimes those defenses look like destruction, not of the threat, but of opportunity. You think you are afraid of failure, but you're often more afraid of success, because success increases what is at stake. It says you are worthy. It says you care, and that caring makes you vulnerable. So, instead, you take refuge in what feels familiar. You sabotage because staying stuck feels predictable. It's safe. It confirms an identity that you already know how to live with. It keeps the world small, yet manageable. And a part of you believes that safety is the same as peace, but it is not. It's just control in disguise. Because when you sabotage yourself, you maintain control of the outcome, even if it hurts. And sometimes, the pain you inflict on yourself is less frightening than the hope that someone or something will disappoint. But every time you do this, something else happens too. You show that the old wound was right. You confirm the belief that you are not prepared, that you are not worthy of love, that you are not destined for anything better. And over time, that belief becomes your identity. But sabotage isn't the root. It is a symptom, a sign of an old part of you that still believes that pain is coming, that joy is a deception, that if you try, you will be exposed. And until that part is heard, it will continue to repeat the same cycle, the same decision, the same pattern in which you swore you would never fall again. Repetition compulsion. Why? You keep reliving what hurt you. You leave a toxic relationship only to find yourself in another just like it. They escape from the chaos in which they grew up only to recreate it in their career, their friendships, their private life. They swore they would never return, and somehow they never really left. This is repetition compulsion. The unconscious attraction to reliving the same dynamics that once hurt us. Not because we enjoy the pain, but because the pain feels familiar and familiarity gives us security, even when it is killing us. The psyche does not do this out of cruelty, but out of hope. Try to master the original wound, to rewrite the ending and finally win where we once lost. So we look for similar situations, similar people, similar roles. We find ourselves again in the same emotional landscape, with a different scenario, the same storm, and we think that maybe this time will be different. But it rarely is, because what we are representing is not conscious. It is an underlying pattern, invisible, yet powerful. A script written in childhood, in trauma, through silence. And each time we enter the old role, the furrow deepens. That is why survivors of emotional neglect often seek emotionally distant partners. Why do children of chaos often create crisis and calm? Why do we keep choosing familiar pain instead of unknown peace? Because peace feels strange and the brain does not trust what it fails to recognize. It prefers the predictable pain of repetition to change's terrifying vulnerability. And a part of us believes that if we do it right this time, if we manage to fix it, earn it, endure it, we can finally heal what was never resolved. But healing does not happen through repetition. It happens through rupture, through awareness, by interrupting the loop long enough to ask ourselves, what is it that I am really pursuing? Because repetition is not only about the other person. It is about the role we play, the mask we don, the identity in which we shrink. And until we question that role, we continue to reenact the same scene over and over. Another name, another face, same script. And the more we play it, the more convincing it becomes. We begin to believe that this is all we can do. That love always must hurt. That stability always must end. That we're destined to live within the same pattern we swore to escape. But patterns aren't prophecies. They are echoes. And echoes can fade if we stop repeating our call. The choice is not easy, but possible. And it begins with leaving the stage to ask yourself who you are without the script. The mask of identity. Who are you without your role? You describe yourself in few words. Perhaps your work, your personality, your own preferences. I am ambitious. I am shy. I am a trustworthy one. It seems sincere. But is it really? Or is it a mask that you have worn so long that you have forgotten that you put it on? Identity offers us stability. It helps us move through a chaotic world with something solid to hold. But sometimes the identity we cling to isn't who we truly are. It is who we had to become just to survive. We play roles. The solver, the intelligent one, the funny, the strong, the accommodating, the silent observer. Roles that formed early, when we learned which parts of us were safe to show and which weren't. Over time, those roles calcify. They become scripts, and the world reinforces them now. People expect you to be a certain way, and you give them what they want. Not because it is true, but because it is familiar, expected, and rewarded. But what happens when the role starts to hurt? When being the caregiver leaves one exhausted? When being the achiever leaves one empty? When being the peacemaker silences all your rage? You feel trapped, but cannot imagine who you would be without that role. Because the mask has merged into your face. And here's the trick. The more successful the identity, the more difficult it becomes to question it. They praise you for it, promote you, they love you for it. But that love often comes with a condition. Do not change. Remain reliable. Remain small. Remain what we need you be. So we protect the mask even when it drowns us, because dropping it means risking rejection, confusion, and pain. It means facing this question. If I stop acting, will they still love me? And beneath that, a deeper fear exists. If I'm not who I thought I was, then who am I? But identity is not a prison. It is a process, and the self is not fixed. It is a changing field. Who you were at 15 is not who you will become at 50. And that is not failure. It is growth. But growth needs loss. You have to leave what once protected you. You have to take off your mask. Not to reject it, but see what is beneath. And sometimes what you find isn't weakness. It is the part of you that could never quite express itself. But before that voice can rise, something else must fall. The defense is keeping the mask in place. The defense mechanisms. How the mind hides from all pain. You feel something arising. The pain, shame, fear, and instantly the mind intervenes. Redirects, distracts, restructures. You do not even realize it is happening. In one moment, you are on the verge of feeling something unbearable. The next, you are scrolling, blaming, laughing, and forgetting. It is not weakness, but protection. Defense mechanisms are the psyche's emergency systems. The way the mind protects itself from truths it is not prepared to face. Not forever, but long enough for survival. And they are everywhere. You deny what's obvious. You rationalize what's harmful. You project your anger. You repress your needs. You intellectualize your heartbreak. You turn sadness into sarcasm. You transform guilt into control. Because emotions in their pure state feel intense. And sometimes feeling everything would shatter you. So the mind intervenes, not to deceive, but to protect you. The child not allowed to cry becomes the adult who never feels. The teenager who learned love was conditional becomes the adult who keeps guard up. The person who felt powerless becomes obsessed with control. These defenses make sense. They were brilliant adaptations to impossible situations. But the problem is they don't know when to stop. What once protected you now begins imprisoning you. You not only repress the pain, but also the joy. You don't just avoid conflict. You avoid connection. You not only rationalize the bad behavior of others, you excuse your own. And the most difficult thing is that most happens unconsciously. You think you're making decisions, but often you're only following old scripts written in panic, edited by survival, repeated until they seem part of your personality. But personality is not immutable. It is a defense with a name. And when we begin to realize these defenses, when we surprise ourselves diverting attention, escaping, attacking, we create a space, a moment, an opportunity to pause and ask ourselves, what am I really protecting? Because the defense always points to the wound. Sometimes it is easier to remain insensitive than admit that it still hurts. Sometimes it is easier to stay angry than feel powerless. And sometimes we build our whole life around the idea that nothing can touch us just to prevent pain from surfacing. But the pain does not disappear when ignored. It hides in decisions, in patterns, in the roles we play without realizing it. And if you can track it, if you can sit with what the defense was trying to hide, you not only get a deeper vision, but you also get an option. But of all the defenses we cling to, there is one that seems the noblest, the most justified, the hardest to abandon. The one that says, I have to be right. The need to be right. Why being right feels like a matter of survival. You feel how the tension in your chest increases. The discussion begins. You know that your argument is solid. You know it. And yet, the longer the disagreement lasts, the less it is about facts and the more it is about you. It's not just a debate. It is a defense of identity. The need to be right is not just a matter of ego. It is a matter of survival. At a deep psychological level, being correct is perceived as control, as security, as value. And when someone challenges your version of reality, it doesn't just feel bad. It feels dangerous. Because if they are right, what are you? Being wrong threatens more than the discussion. It threatens your vision of the world, your credibility, your place in the group. The mind responds to that threat with urgency, raising the tone, changing the rules, looking for any logic that allows it to win. Because winning feels like existence, and the brain rewards it. Being right activates pleasure centers. It gives us a dose of validation, a sense of clarity in a chaotic world. We like to feel safe, not because it is always useful, but because it stabilizes us emotionally. But that stability comes at a price. The moment we value being right more than being sincere, we stop listening. We interrupt. We exaggerate our memories, distort facts, and reduce others to straw men. We prefer protecting ourselves before investigating the truth. And the more intelligent we are, the better we do it. We collect evidence, not to explore, but to defend ourselves. We turn logic into a sword. We build arguments as if they were armor, forgetting that beneath all that we could be wrong. But being wrong does not mean lacking value. And truth is not a possession. It is a process, one that requires humility, curiosity, being willing to consider two possibilities and say, I may not know everything yet. But that kind of openness is uncommon because it requires letting go of the illusion that control and correctness are the same thing. They are not, because being right can keep you comfortable, but being open can change you. And sometimes it is enough to listen to someone speak, not for the facts they offer, but for the emotion behind it. Because emotion also spreads invisibly, contagiously, and we often absorb more than we think. Emotional contagion. How we capture what others feel. You enter a room and notice it instantly. Something is not right. Nobody says anything, but the atmosphere feels heavier. You notice that your posture changes. Your tone softens or becomes sharper. You start adapting to the room. That is not empathy. It is contagion. Emotional contagion is the invisible transmission of a person's mood to another. It does not ask for permission. It eludes logic. It travels through mirror neurons, subtle signals, the way someone exhales or avoids eye contact. An anxious person can infect an entire group. A calm presence can calm a storm. We are social creatures created to sync, to feel what others feel, and thus be able to belong, cooperate, and survive. But that syncing does not always benefit us, because sometimes we not only perceive emotions, but absorb them. We carry another person's sadness and wonder why we are tired. We feel ashamed after a conversation and do not know where it comes from. We lash out after being surrounded by anger without knowing that we are imitating, not initiating. And this happens fast. Before thinking, before understanding, emotion jumps the void like static electricity. You don't choose it, you catch it. This is how moods spread through teams, families, entire communities. A single tone can change the course of a meeting. A single facial expression can define the mood of a home. And sometimes emotional contagion lasts longer than the person who started it. You may still be dragging your parents' fear long after you've moved out. You may reproduce your partner's doubts even after they have changed. You may internalize the cruelty of a stranger and not realize that it continues to resonate in your nervous system. Because emotions, when not examined, become a pattern, a way of being that seems like personality, but is actually residue. And the danger is that we begin to confuse what we have absorbed with what we really feel. You think you're angry, but you have only been near anger. You think that you have no hope, but you have absorbed someone else's despair. You confuse contagion with identity. And when that happens often enough, you forget what your normal state is like. You lose the notion of where others end and where you begin. But you can break the loop, not by rejecting emotions, but by recognizing where they come from. Asking yourself, is this mine? Don't want to carry it? Because some feelings have never belonged to you, and some stories that you carry with you did not begin with you. They were absorbed, transmitted, they were repeated. But you don't have to keep repeating them. You can choose to rewrite the stories we tell to survive. How we turn pain into meaning. Something happens. It hurts. And almost instantly, the mind begins to weave. Not only memories, but stories, reasons, patterns. A phrase that begins with "this happened" because it is instinct survival. We tell stories to explain what should not have happened, to make sense of what does not have it. We turn chaos into order, even if that order is cruel. I was weak. I deserved it. That's how life is. Not because those things are true, but because they give pain a place to live, a framework. Without a story, suffering floats. It remains shapeless. It haunts us. But once it is placed within a narrative, it becomes manageable, bearable, even meaningful. So we make sense of it, even if that sense hurts us. We say that it has made us stronger, that it had to happen, or that we are better thanks to it. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it is a defense mechanism disguised as wisdom. But in any case, it protects us because human beings can endure almost anything as long as the story makes sense. The problem is that the story usually begins before we are old enough to know that we are writing it. A father leaves, and we think it's our fault. We are mistreated, and we decide that it is love. We try, we fail, and we write a script entitled, "I am not enough." They're not just ideas. They become identities. And identities shape what we allow, what we pursue, what we sabotage. A story becomes a filter. And over time, we stop seeing life as it is. We see it as we expect it to be. So when good things happen, we question them. When the bad ones arrive, we say, of course. We call it realism, but it is just repetition because the story has not changed. And sometimes we cling to pain, not because we want to suffer, but because we have built too much around it. Letting go of the story means letting go of the explanation, the protection, the self with which we have learned to live. But you're not your story. You are the narrator. And you can pause, reframe, deploy a new version that contains the truth but does not adore the wound, that honors what happened without turning it into your future. But sometimes stories don't arrive right away. Sometimes the mind cannot grasp them quickly enough. And when the truth hits hard, it doesn't rewrite it. It closes the book completely. Denial as a spiritual reflection. The mind's last line of defense. You hear the news. You feel the change. The silence after the phone call. The weight of a diagnosis. The betrayal you never thought possible. And your first thought isn't always the pain. Sometimes it is nothing at all. Only stillness. A void, as if reality hasn't arrived yet. That is denial. It is not a choice, but a reflection. A final psychological shield that rises when the truth threatens to overwhelm us before the pain, before the rage, before the collapse. Denial exists. It is not a lie. It is a pause, a way for the soul to catch up. Denial says, not yet. Not because the mind doesn't understand, but because it understands too well. It feels an earthquake coming and freezes the image. It slows down time, keeps reality on the edge of perception so that the body has a chance to prepare. It manifests in the small moments, in the way you laugh at something terrifying, in the way you continue your routines after everything changed, in the way you say, I am fine, and almost believe it. Because denial is spiritual. It is not just a psychological defense. It is an existential isolation. It allows us to survive the impossible, to absorb the unbearable in doses. It is what allows a soldier to go through a butchery, to appear normal in the midst of pain, and a person to rise from the ashes without crumbling into dust. But denial doesn't last. It cannot. Reality always returns, slowly at first, then suddenly. A detail, a memory, a moment when the illusion falters. And when it does, it hurts more than before. Because now the truth takes form. And when the truth takes form, it asks something of you. It demands presence, response, change. It forces you to stand where you have been avoiding, to feel what you have buried, and to name what has been locked behind the shield. But that is when healing can begin. Not in the moment in which we shun the truth, but in the moment in which we begin to let it in. And yet, there is danger in staying there. Because when denial becomes identity, we don't just ignore the truth. We resist transformation. We stop growing. We confuse stillness with strength, numbness with wisdom, apathy with resilience. We cover ourselves in denial as if it were armor, forgetting that armor does not breathe. And in a world flooded with information, where truths hit us daily, it is easy to remain hidden, to let denial become our atmosphere. But something in us keeps feeling, keeps reseeding, keeps knowing. And when enough people feel it at the same time, that silence can explode into something different. It sucks in the digital age, when consensus replaces thought. You scroll through the screen. You see the likes, the comments, the times it has been shared. You feel it. Some publications shine with approval. Others convey a slight shame. You stop before speaking. You doubt before clicking. Do you want to say what you think? But first you ask yourself, what will others think? This is the modern gregarious instinct. In ancient times, it kept us alive. Belonging meant protection. Isolation meant death. So we watched the tribe. We imitated the behavior. We perceived what was safe by what others accepted. It was not weakness. It was survival. And it still is. But the tribe has changed. Now the town is not a bonfire. It is a feed, a network, a changing crowd of looks. What is at stake is no longer just social. It is algorithmic. Your relevance, your visibility, your sense of self shaped by digital consensus. And that consensus spreads quickly. Someone expresses their outrage, and it multiplies. Someone receives praise, and their words become truth. The stronger the opinion, the safer the person who repeats it feels. Not because it is correct, but because it is accepted. We don't just follow the herd, we become it. It is not that we stop thinking. It is that we begin to think through others. We look to the sides before looking inward. We wait for signs before forming an opinion. And little by little, our own voice is extinguished under the weight of what is fashionable. We externalize our values. We exchange discomfort for agreement. We learn to anticipate applause and criticism. And in the end, we stop asking ourselves what we believe. We only ask what is safe to say. Even dissent becomes an act. You challenge the group, but only within the new group that rewards the challenge. You break with the herd just enough to join another one, because true isolation still terrifies us. But here's a danger. When fear of rejection exceeds the desire for truth, conformity becomes camouflage. We lose the nuances. We flatten ideas and turn them into slogans. We exchange insight for belonging. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it, because the line between social intelligence and self-censorship is very thin. And in a world that moves so fast, it's easier to adopt an opinion than build one. Feeling good about being surrounded, not about being still. We praise consensus as if it were wisdom. But consensus can be inertia. It can be fear. It can be a wave that sweeps away individuality and leaves only echoes. But the crowd is not always wise. And when everyone is looking at the same signal, it is easy to confuse noise with clarity and clarity with truth, especially when all that matters is whether someone else agrees already. The social proof. Why we trust the crowd more than ourselves. You walk past two restaurants. One is empty and the other is full of people. You haven't heard of either, but without thinking, you choose the one that is full. Not by logic, but by signal. That is social proof. The idea that if others do it, it must be right. If others believe it, it must be true. If enough people approve it, maybe you should too. It seems like intuition, but it is imitation. Social proof is old. It helped our ancestors decide what was safe to eat, where to find shelter, when to flee. If the group ran, you ran. If the group remained calm, you stayed. Thinking for yourself was dangerous. When time was short and threats were real. But the threats have changed. Now we navigate through information, not predators. Opinions, not lions. Belief systems, not shelters for survival. And we continue looking at others before trusting ourselves. You see a product with thousands of 5-star reviews, and you take it for granted that it is good. You watch a video because it has gone viral. You believe in a thread of comments in which everyone agrees. You nod your head during a conversation even if you don't agree because everyone else does. Over time, your personal compass is replaced by a collective one. That compass does not always point to truth. Popularity does not guarantee value. It is a sign of visibility. It reveals the impulse, the advantage of arriving first or being the loudest. However, the brain often skips those checks. It sees the crowd and assumes that the crowd must know something. Even when we know that is not like that, even when we want to think independently, social proof has gravity. It pulls at our sense of doubt. It whispers to us, "You may be wrong. Everyone believes it. Don't be the only one who doesn't." So, sometimes we subtly align ourselves. We nod, scroll the screen, give a like. Not because it fits, but because it is easier, less risky, less lonely for us. The more we do it, the more the crowd becomes our reality. Even when it is superficial, even when false. Social proof shapes not only what we buy, it shapes what we believe, what we say aloud, what we allow ourselves to question. When something is repeated enough, it becomes hard not to absorb it. Repetition begins to seem true, even when just noise. In a world where silence is punished and visibility the currency, we follow the crowd, not to find meaning, but to avoid exile. Our deepest need is not always clarity. Often it is connection, and nothing attracts us to it faster than the illusion that everyone else is already there. Tribalism and belonging, the price of feeling home. You find your people. They speak your language. They share your values. They laugh at your jokes. And for the first time in a long time, you breathe. Belonging is like feeling safe, like getting warm. It is one of our oldest needs. We are programmed to look for it, to feel anchored in something bigger than ourselves, a family, a culture, a cause, a side. But tribalism offers not only connection, it demands loyalty. And that demand is subtle. At first it feels like loyalty, like unity. But little by little it becomes expectation, agreement, conformity. The price of belonging is often silence, and the currency is commitment. You start filtering what you say, what you post, the questions you're willing to ask, not because you have changed your mind, but because you don't want to risk your place within the group. So you hide your doubts. You flatten your nuances. You echo the safe opinion. And over time, you forget what your unfiltered voice sounded like. Because tribes reward clarity, not complexity, identity, not ambiguity. And once you're inside, it's hard to get out. Not only because you would lose the connection, but because the tribe is often defined by those it opposes. You're not only with us, you are against them. And leaving not only feels like a loss, it feels like a betrayal. So we stay, we adapt, we exchange silent truths for a noisy solidarity and convince ourselves that this is what it means to belong. But there is a difference between connection and containment. True belonging allows questions, differences, growth. Tribalism does not. It says, these are the rules. This is the narrative. This is what we believe. And if you question it too often, too strongly, with too much reflection, you risk being expelled. Exile isn't always explicit. It can present itself in the form of silence, of exclusion, of rejection, of unfollowing someone. Sometimes it is enough to raise an eyebrow or change the tone to feel that a dividing line is drawn. And so, we internalize rules. We self-censor ourselves. We stop expressing ourselves not because we have been silenced, but because we learn to anticipate rejection. We tell ourselves we are safe and have found our people. But the security that depends on agreement is not really security. It is an act, and these acts are exhausting. Over time, we shrink to fit the tribe. We abandon nuance for clarity. We let belonging replace curiosity. But real connection needs no agreement. It needs courage. The courage to be seen, not just for what we repeat, but question. And in an increasingly divided world, where identity is often formed in opposition, pressure to choose sides increases. And when everyone speaks in unison, doubt sounds like threat, groupthink, and the death of doubt. When agreement becomes the only truth. You're sitting in a room of people. Someone shares an idea. Everyone nods. You feel a hint of hesitation. Something doesn't add up, but nobody says anything. So you swallow doubt. You smile. You nod. This is groupthink, and it feels like unity. But underneath, something vital is dying. Doubt. Doubt is uncomfortable, inconvenient. It slows things, complicates decisions, forces questioning what seems established, but also keeps us honest. It's the engine of progress, the start of clarity, the first crack in illusion. Groupthink buries that crack before it can widen. It replaces curiosity with consensus, questions with slogans. It rewards harmony over truth, punishing dissent not with punishments, but silence, discomfort, distance. It is perceived in meetings, in movements, in communities where all the answers seem rehearsed and every disagreement feels like a betrayal. The group becomes a choir, and soon everyone sings the same song, not because they believe it, but because it's easier than singing alone. And the more the melody is repeated, the more it sounds like truth, even when it is wrong, even when it is dangerous. Because when doubt disappears, certainty takes over. And certainty without control seeks no feedback. It doesn't listen. It builds walls around the idea and calls the wall reality. But real thought is messy. It goes around, hesitates, contradicts itself. It raises uncomfortable questions and expects uncomfortable answers. Group thinking skips that part. It gives you the prepared answer and expects you to defend it. Not because it is yours, but because it is ours. And that is comforting. To belong through agreement, identity through echo. We feel safe surrounded by people who think like us. But if nobody can say what they really think, is it unity or fear? Sometimes we tell ourselves that we are aligned, but what we really are is silent. And in that silence, something happens. We forget how to doubt. We forget that disagreement is not an attack, that not knowing is not failure, that asking "what if" is not weakness. Because when an idea has been repeated enough times, when it has been appreciated, shared, amplified, and assimilated, it no longer seems an opinion. It seems like a fact. And when the group speaks with one voice for long enough, you end up stopping listening to your own mimicry as a form of survival. Why? We imitate to feel safe. You are in a new room. You still do not know the rules. You observe, you wait, and little by little, without realizing it, you begin changing. You imitate the tone, you match the energy, you laugh a second later just to keep up. It is not a strategy, it is instinct. Imitation is one of the oldest survival tools we have. From the moment we are born, we begin copying the faces around us. The smiles, the frowns, the rhythms of speech. That is how we learn what is safe, what is welcome, what will keep us close. In evolution, integrating meant survival. Standing out meant being left behind. For that reason, the brain developed shortcuts, mirror neurons, social tracking, emotional imitation. We become what surrounds us, and we continue to do it. You adopt the way of speaking of your friends, their laughter, their posture. You dress like your colleagues without knowing why. You repeat opinions not because you have examined them, but because they resonate in the room. It does not seem like acting. It seems like a connection. But imitation can be dangerous when it is put before authenticity. Because if you're always changing to fit in, you begin losing sight of what was originally yours. Your voice becomes softer. Your limits blur. You forget where imitation ends and where identity begins. It is not about weakness. It is about how we are programmed. And for many, especially for those who have suffered traumas, imitation is not just something social. It is defensive. You learn to read moods as if they were weather. You adjust your tone to avoid explosions. You change your personality to avoid rejection. It works. It maintains peace. It wins you the approval of others. But it comes at a price. Because when you never take off the mask, even you start to believe it is your real face. And over time, chronic imitation creates a kind of inner silence. You are so in tune with what others need that you stop asking yourself who you are when no one watches. But identity formed under pressure is not true identity. It is camouflage. And when enough people in a room imitate each other, everyone becomes a reflection. The group feels connected, but no one is truly seen. Even so, imitation persists because the moment someone rises above the pattern, breaks the tone, challenges the energy, security is shaken. The hierarchy is tested. And when a group is based on uniformity, even a small act of individuality can seem like a challenge, especially when we have learned that following the leader is safest. The reflection of authority. Why do we obey without thinking? They tell you what to do. They don't ask you, nor do they persuade you. They simply tell you with confidence, with a badge, with a tone that does not waver. And before questioning it, you nod. You obey. You act. Not because it makes sense, but because someone said it authoritatively. This is the reflection of authority. The deeply rooted tendency to trust power, especially when it speaks without hesitation. It is not reasoned. It is automatic, a shortcut built into the social brain. In small tribes, authority meant survival. A leader gave orders to protect their group. Obeying was not only a sign of loyalty, it increased the chances of survival. Therefore, evolution favored the instinct for deference. We still retain that instinct. It is seen in classrooms, offices, and hospitals. A person in uniform makes a statement, and most people stop questioning. It is seen in sex, companies, and daily life, where tone carries more weight than truth, where confidence convinces. Even when it is hollow, and the more formal the title, the more unquestionable the order. We are taught to respect authority, but respect is often confused for obedience. And obedience, when the unconscious, becomes dangerous because authority does not guarantee wisdom, goodness, or care. It only guarantees influence. And the reflection of submitting does not ask if power is used well. It only reacts to the presence of power. Even the posture of authority, the firm voice, the eye contact, and the quick decisions can silence doubts before they arise. People move on not because they agree, but because resistance seems too risky. And when the cost of questioning is shame, punishment, or exclusion, most people opt for silence. But silence is not always synonymous with agreement. Sometimes it is fear disguised as confidence. And when enough people obey without thinking, the truth becomes optional. Reality is no longer determined by evidence, and is now determined by whoever has the microphone. And if that microphone belongs to someone who values status over content, the line between leadership and acting begins to blur. Status games that we don't admit we are playing. The silent competition hidden behind daily life. You publish something thoughtful. You look at the likes. You say it doesn't matter, but you keep checking. Someone enters the room, and without thinking, you adapt. A tone, a word, a posture, just enough to be noticed. They haven't told you to play, but you are playing. Status is not something we explicitly pursue. It is something we subtly, constantly orbit around. The need to matter, to be seen, to feel important. Most of us don't call it status. We call it ambition, confidence, or influence. But in the end, it is the same engine. And it is old. In all tribes, all systems, all groups, status determined survival. A higher status meant more resources, more protection, more partners, more voice. The instincts did not disappear. They evolved. Now they manifest as competition disguised as conversation, as image management disguised as authenticity, as subtle rivalry in dinners, meetings, and social networks. And most of the time, we aren't even aware. We measure ourselves with invisible metrics. Who is listened to? Who is followed? Who is respected? And the games vary according to the environment. In one space, it is intellect. In another, it is beauty. In others, it is humility, outrage, or indifference. The rules are fluid, but the goal remains the same, to ascend, even if just a little. And this search isn't always toxic. Wanting respect is human. Wanting recognition is not weakness. But when status becomes the silent metric behind every interaction, it distorts connection. We stop listening to understand. We listen to win. We stop expressing ourselves to connect. We act to be seen. And the danger of these games is not that they exist, but that they're hidden. We convince ourselves that we are above them, that we are not playing, that we are only being ourselves. But the self has been shaped by thousands of silent competitions. And when everyone is acting, even just a little, no one feels truly known. So we keep polishing, selecting, competing, while telling ourselves that we are not trying. Because admitting that you are playing the game is like losing it. But what happens when the game intensifies? When status ceases to be a matter of subtle gestures and becomes imposed by the people around you, the pressure of peers and the erosion of the self. When fitting in costs too much, you find yourself in a room where everyone agrees. You feel the tension in your chest, the hesitation in your gut, but you remain silent. You nod your head. You laugh in cue. It is not fear. Exactly. It is something more practiced. The pressure from peers is quiet. It does not always seem like coercion. Sometimes it seems like belonging, a raised eyebrow, a late response, a moment of silence long enough to make you question yourself. You conform not because you have changed your mind, but because the cost of speaking seems higher than the cost of silence. This is how the self erodes. It starts bit by bit. A changed opinion, a censored phrase, a subtle change in how you behave. You adapt not for truth, but approval. You hide the parts of yourself that might make others uncomfortable. And the more you do, the more you forget they are there. Peer pressure needs no threat. It only needs an environment, one in which difference is seen as dangerous, where conformity is seen as a virtue, where silence is seen as wisdom. Even when it is fear, you start anticipating disapproval before it does. You filter your instincts before they fully form. And soon the pressure does not come from the outside. It lives in you. You become your own censor. And it works. You fit in. They praise you. It does not bother you. In appearance, you are fine. But deep down, something is missing. Your voice, your complexity, your ability to show disagreement without feeling insecure. Because the longer you stay in a space that does not tolerate divergence, the harder it is to distinguish where the pressure ends and where you begin. This is how identity fades, not in an instant, but in 1,000 small silences. And those silences accumulate. They begin to reshape your internal dialogue. You stop entertaining certain thoughts, not because they are false, but because you do not feel free to express them. You start editing your personality before you enter a room. Over time, the mask becomes muscle memory. You smile when you are supposed to. You agree by reflex. You become fluent in the language of integration, and little by little, you begin to convince yourself that edited version is who you really are. But deep down, a tension grows. A silent friction between what you say and what you feel. The feeling that you are shrinking, not evolving. That your belonging is conditional, not earned. And in the meantime, the group nods together. Not because everyone believes it, but because no one wants to be the first to be left alone. And when being alone feels like failure, people don't tell the truth, they represent it. Pointing out virtues. When morality becomes an act. You say the right thing, you publish the proper message, you align yourself with the right cause. Not always because you deeply believe it, but because you know that it means something. It says, I am one of the good ones. Virtue signaling is the act of demonstrating moral correctness, not necessarily to make a difference, but so that it is seen that you do it. It is not always dishonest, but it isn't always honest either. It exists in the space between integrity and impression. It begins with a genuine impulse, the desire to defend something, to express oneself, to care. But in a hyper-visible world in which identity is currency and silence is suspicious, that impulse can be hijacked by the need to seem righteous. So we refine our posture. We amplify a message. We spread the values that we know will be well received, not to change, but to gain approval. And the more approval we obtain, the more we believe that we have done something significant. But approval is not the same thing as impact. Because virtue, signaling often stays as a signal. It does not raise hard questions. It does not take uncomfortable measures. It represents morality without assuming its weight. We don't want just to be good. We want to be seen as good. And in the right group, at the right moment, the appearance of virtue is worth more than virtue itself. This acting becomes addictive. The likes, the validation, the sensation of alignment. And over time, the signal becomes the objective. We forget to ask ourselves if our values cost us something, if they push us to grow, if they still belong to us, or if they have become a disguise. But when morality becomes theater, its power dissolves. We say some words. We share an image. But inside, we have not changed. We have not risked anything. We have not examined the ways in which we benefit from the same systems that we condemn. Showing virtues is easy. Living according to your values is not. And in a culture driven by appearances, the temptation to act will always be stronger than the call to transformation. But real virtue does not always go viral. Sometimes it is silent, invisible, unrewarded, and sometimes it even makes you unpopular, especially when the morality of the crowd begins to lean towards exclusion, towards the love that only exists within the lines and the hate towards anyone who lives beyond them. The love towards those who belong to the group versus the hate towards those who do not belong to it. The shadow that hides under belonging. You find your circle. You feel accepted, seen. You speak and people nod. You feel warmth, loyalty, protection. But then someone enters the room. Someone who does not belong to the group, and the atmosphere changes. This is the double face of group identity. The love towards those who belong to the group is often accompanied by suspicion, if not hostility, towards those who do not belong to it. We speak of community, unity, solidarity. But what we rarely admit is that many groups are defined not only by what they value, but by what they reject. The group gives us security, but sometimes it needs an enemy to feel strong. And thus we exaggerate any differences. We reduce outsiders to mere caricatures. We attribute motives to them without even listening. We unite not only by shared values, but also shared opposition. This is nothing new. It is old. Tribes survive by distinguishing friends from threats. We are programmed to distinguish us from others. It is a reflection. But in modern life, those tribal instincts don't disappear. They are repackaged as ideologies, subcultures, hashtags. And the love we feel within the group becomes inseparable from the contempt we feel for those who question it. It seems fair, protective, necessary, but it blinds us. Because no group is immune to error, no outsider wrong by default. But when love for the group becomes sacred, doubt is treason, curiosity weakness. And even basic kindness towards those who do not belong to the group feels like crossing a line. So we build walls, not physical, but psychological, emotional. We train ourselves to look the other way, to assume the worst, to ignore the nuances because the nuances threaten cohesion, and cohesion is sacred. But the stronger the walls, the more difficult to grow. We stop asking ourselves any real questions. We stop listening. We stop imagining what it's like to be on the other side. And as the group becomes hermetic, rules become stricter. Suddenly, there's a script to follow, an emotional tone to imitate, a growing list of enemies. Love begins to feel conditional, not based on who you are, but how well you adapt. And when you neglect yourself, even slightly, the heat cools. The smiles fade. The silences lengthen. You feel the cold distance from that group that was once home. Love that extends only to those who agree isn't love. It is comfort, and belonging that demands enemies will always need someone expelled. So we see how communities harden, how identities radicalize, and how the space between us becomes too large to cross. And behind it all, fear resonates louder than all else. If I don't hate who they hate, will I be loved? The terror of rejection. Why? Exclusion hurts like a wound. You feel it before naming it. A change in tone, a door that won't open, an unread message. It is not violence. It is absence, but it hurts just the same. Rejection does not just sting. It destroys. The human brain processes social pain through the same pathways as physical pain. Being excluded is being hurt, literally, because during most of our evolutionary history, rejection meant death. You needed a tribe to survive. Being alone meant exposure. Being alone meant being doomed. That is why, even now, when they ignore us, reject us, unfollow us, or overlook us, we don't just feel sad. We feel insecure. That is why rejection hurts more than disappointment does. It makes us question not only what we have done, but who we are. It awakens shame, doubt, a panic that tells us, they don't want you. You don't fit in. And at that moment, everything narrows. Logic fades. The body prepares. One's history begins to fracture. Because rejection does not only isolate, it disorients. You repeat the conversation. You analyze your tone, words, and timing. You look for clues. You imagine how they saw you. You imagine how they did not see you. And somewhere in that spiral, a question arises. What is wrong with me? That is the real terror. It is not the loss of connection, but of value. And so we adapt. We shrink. We soften edges. We anticipate the no. We become smaller, quieter, easier to love. Not because we want to, but because the mind will do anything to avoid exile. But this protection has a price. When we live in fear of rejection, we stop being whole. We exchange authenticity for acceptability. We silence truth to preserve the illusion of harmony. We hide those parts of ourselves that yearn to be seen, and we tell ourselves that we are safer. But the more we edit ourselves, the more alone we feel. Because being loved covertly is feeling unknown. And the more time we spend unseen, the more we yearn for any recognition, even the one that hurts. So we search, compare, compete, scan the room, not in search of connection, but of confirmation that we still matter. And in that search, something else awakens. Not only the fear of losing what we have, but envy of what another person does. The strange logic of jealousy. What envy is really trying to tell you. It hits you before you can stop it. You see their success, their beauty, their ease, and something tightens in your chest. It's not just longing. It's not just admiration. It is envy, ugly, unpleasant, undeniable. You tell yourself that it's irrational, that you have your own path, that you know it better. But the feeling persists because envy isn't just a reaction. It is a sign. It is the mind's distorted attempt to highlight what you fear you will never have. It tells you that they have it and you don't, and that it matters. But here is the twist. Jealousy rarely points to the thing itself. They point to a deeper hunger, not only for the result, but for what it represents: respect, attention, tranquility, love, freedom. And when we believe that there is not enough for everyone, another person's win feels like a loss for us. So we back down. We resent. We compare. But comparison is never neutral. It distorts perception. We magnify their strengths and minimize ours. We forget the context. We imagine their inner world as something perfect, complete, free of doubt. And we wonder why we feel so small in the shadow of their imaginary perfection. But jealousy does not mean that you are petty. You mean that you are human. And often you mean that you are paying attention to something that matters to you more than you're willing to admit. That person with the book contract. Maybe it's not about them. Maybe it's about the story you carry inside and haven't yet told. That friend who always seems effortlessly sociable. Maybe it's about your longing for tranquility, connection, presence. Jealousy does not always point to a threat. Sometimes they point to a dream. But we don't treat them like that. We treat jealousy as if it were poison, something to deny, hide, reject. But what if they were a map? What if they showed us not who we hate, but what we need? The envy you feel is not proof that you are behind. It is proof that you are awake. And if you follow it without shame, if you trace it to its origin, you may find something tender, something you used to want, something you still want. And somewhere in that desire, waiting silently, is the form of love that you have not yet claimed. The kind of love you still long to give. And maybe someday, the kind of love you'll finally be ready to receive. Why we love those we love. The hidden architecture of attraction. It begins with a spark, a look, a voice, a phrase that arrives at just the right moment. You feel it before you understand it. An attraction to someone that defies logic. You say it is chemistry, destiny, a feeling that you cannot explain. But there is always a pattern behind the magic. We do not fall in love at random. We fall into familiar forms. We're not only attracted to who they are, but to what they awaken within us. Some remind us of home. Others remind us of a wound. Some calm something very deep within us. Others light a fire we thought extinguished. And often it is not what they do, but what they reflect. A part of ourselves that we want to recover. A story that we want to rewrite. A hope that we never fully abandoned. Attraction rarely has to do with surface appearance. It has to do with resonance. Sometimes we fall in love with someone who reflects the father we could never please or the friend who always left. Sometimes we fall in love with security. Sometimes with chaos. And we don't always know the difference until it's too late. But every love, whether lasting or ephemeral, teaches us something about who we are when they see us and who we become when they don't see us. We imagine love as a choice, as freedom, but largely it is an inheritance. The unconscious legacy of what we learn to pursue, to conform to yearn for. We look for what is familiar, even when it hurts us, because the nervous system remembers, and sometimes the body does not relax with kindness, but with a pattern it knows how to survive. So we confuse chemistry with compatibility, intensity with intimacy, need with love. And we keep searching because under every love disappointment, there is a question. Is there someone who will choose me? Not only when I'm at my best, but when I'm falling apart. The answer is not only in the people we meet, but in what attracts us. And more importantly, in what we are finally willing to give up. Because the way we love is never just about desire. It's about memories. It's about survival. And whether we cling, avoid, pursue, or become paralyzed, those patterns don't come out of nowhere. They come from what we learn to expect, long before we know how love is supposed to feel. Sometimes we are attracted to the same type of person over and over again, not because it works, but because it is familiar. The type of person we say we want and the type of person we actually fall in love with can be very different. And the gap between both is where healing awaits us. Love not only exposes our desires, it exposes our fears. It shows us where it still hurts, where we keep looking for a solution that we never received. And little by little, love becomes not only a connection, but a mirror, one that reflects our unfinished stories, our hidden longings, our forgotten tenderness. And in that reflection, we begin to understand that sometimes the most transformative love is not the one that ignites us. It is the one that teaches us to stay, to trust, to be loved without having to disappear. Attachment styles, the emotional patterns we follow without knowing it. You fall in love with someone. It is electric, uncertain, passionate. Or maybe it's calm. So calm that it scares you. The way you approach, move away, panic, or disappear is not random. It is familiar. It is an attachment style. Long before learning love's language, you learned its rhythm. Through the embrace or absence of a caregiver, through attunement or inconsistency, that rhythm became a model, a silent template of how closeness should feel. If love comes with security, you learn to trust it. If love came with anxiety, you learn to chase it. If love came with distance, you learn to stop needing it. They were not conscious decisions. They were survival strategies. Secure, anxious, evasive, disorganized. They're just names. The true story resides in how your body responds to intimacy. Does it relax, or does it become guarded? Does it approach, or does it move away? Do you express your needs, or do you hide them? Attachment styles are not defects. They are adaptations. They reflect the environment that shaped you, and they often last beyond the conditions for which they were created. You're no longer a child, but childhood logic still persists. That is why, when someone approaches, your nervous system looks for danger. If closeness meant chaos before, you back away. If silence meant abandonment before, you overreact. If affection was unpredictable, you put to the test. You are not broken. You are remembering. But memories do not have to dictate your future. The beauty of understanding your attachment style is not in labeling yourself. It is in realizing the pattern, in pausing when the reflex arises, in asking yourself, am I me now or am I me then? Healing occurs in the pause, in the moment you stay instead of running away, in speaking instead of being silent, in receiving instead of rejecting. And no, it is not easy, because reconfiguring attachment is not a matter of theory. It is a matter of experience. It is about finding a type of love that does not reflect your fear, a type of presence that remains even when you expect it to leave. And sometimes, the change does not begin with words, but with a gesture, a hand that seeks yours, a touch that says, "Here, you are safe." The role of touch. When skin says what words cannot, a hand brushes yours, a shoulder leans towards you, an embrace lasts a second longer than expected. Something changes, not only emotionally, but also physiologically. Touch not only feels good, it speaks. Long before language, we communicated through contact. A mother's embrace, a friend's hand on the back, the stillness of bodies resting together. Touch is one of the first ways we learn about safety, connection, and presence. And when we are deprived of it, we feel not only alone, but disoriented. The skin holds memories. It stores emotional codes. A soft hand can regulate a racing heart. A simple squeeze can break a dam of tears. The nervous system relaxes when we are hugged, not just figuratively, but literally. We are programmed for contact. But in a world that values independence, we are taught to need less, to shield ourselves, to trust words, the intellect, the screens. Little by little, contact becomes rare, uncomfortable, even suspicious. So we suffer in silence, not for sex or romance, but for closeness, for safety, for the quiet confirmation that you exist. You matter. I am here. Contact reminds us that we're real. It breaks the illusion of separation. It slows the mind, calms the body, anchors the moment. It says what language cannot, without asking us to explain. And yet, many spend days, weeks, even years without significant physical connection. Not because they want to, but because at some point contact became transactional, risky, or forgotten. We find ways to substitute it with a heavy blanket, a pet curled next to us, a hand pressed against our chest. This helps, but does not replace what it means to be hugged by another human being who chooses to stay. Because being hugged is more than sensation. It is recognition. It is someone who says, I see your need, and I am not afraid. In moments of anguish, even the best constructed words can fall short. But a hand placed on the back, a palm resting on another, can say much. Contact returns us to the body, not only as a container, but as a place of comfort where the heart can rest. The body remembers what it feels like to be comforted by contact. And even now, in adulthood, a firm hand can silence panic. A soft palm can melt shame. A shared stillness can tell you that you don't have to do this alone. Contact is not luxury. It is language. And when it is expressed with care, it says that you are not invisible, that you're not alone. But when that contact disappears, when connection becomes scarce, something ancient in us begins to stir. A loneliness that is not of mood, but of meaning. Loneliness as an existential alarm. What the silence really says. It begins as a silent pain, a look that is not returned, a day without contacting anyone, a period of time in which your name does not pass through anyone's mind. At first, it feels like stillness. Then it begins to feel like fading. Loneliness is not only the absence of people. It is the absence of resonance, of being known, of being taken into account by someone without needing to act. We are programmed to connect, not only socially, but existentially. The brain not only likes company, but depends on it. Emotional regulation, immunological health, cognitive clarity. These are not formed in isolation, but in relationship. That is why, when connection disappears, something ancient inside us panics. The body interprets loneliness as danger. Not metaphorically, but biologically. The nervous system enters a state of hypervigilance. Stress hormones are triggered. Time becomes distorted. Thoughts repeat themselves. And little by little, a strange erosion begins. It is not that you stop existing. It is that your existence stops resonating. You speak less because nobody listens. You share less because nobody asks. You start to doubt your perceptions, your memories, your value. Loneliness is not only sadness. It is disorientation. It fragments one's own history. It creates an empty space where reflection should be. And in that empty space, the mind can start to fall into a spiral, not only towards longing, but towards a lack of meaning. Because when nobody sees you, it is easy to forget why you are here. This is the real alarm. Loneliness is not only a feeling with which one must live. It is a sign, a distress call from the psyche that says, you are not destined to live this life alone. But the danger is that the longer it lasts, the harder it is to reach it. We start to tell ourselves stories that nobody would understand, that we have become too strange, too distant, that it is better not to burden anyone with our needs. So we isolate ourselves even more, not because we want to, but because we believe we must. And yet, the alarm keeps sounding, not as a punishment, but as an invitation to risk conversing, to send a message so that they see you again. Because loneliness is not only the absence of others, it is the absence of reflection. And when the mirror disappears, even the clearest identity can begin to blur until it becomes a ghost. The biology of heartbreak. Why? It hurts like a physical wound. You wake up and it hits you again. They are gone. The routine has been shattered. The future you imagined vanishes into thin air. You feel oppression in your chest. The food has no flavor. Time slows down. It is not only pain. It is abstinence. Heartbreak is not a poetic metaphor. It is a physiological crisis. The brain reacts to social rejection in the same way as it does to physical injury. The pain circuits are activated. Cortisol floods the system. Sleep is fractured. Concentration collapses. It is not your imagination. Your body is in danger. Loving bonds are chemically real. Oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin form the glue that binds us. And when that connection breaks, the shock is violent. The brain does not distinguish between losing a person and losing a limb. It sends the same alarm. Something vital is missing. So you feel pain, not figuratively, but literally. The heart accelerates. The stomach contracts. The extremities feel heavy. You repeat moments in a loop, not to remember, but to understand, to reconnect, to recover what has been lost. But the more you try, the emptier you feel. And that emptiness is not just absence. It is the echo of what those chemical substances use to stabilize. Their presence regulated your stress. Their voice calmed your nervous system. Now, their silence destabilizes it. So you search, you scroll, you fantasize. Your mind tries to solve a puzzle that it cannot solve. How do I recover what I have lost if it no longer exists? And when the brain cannot resolve the loss, it turns inward. What did I do wrong? What could I have changed? Was it real? Heartbreak is disintegration. It fragments identity. Not only is the person mourned, but the version of oneself that existed with them is mourned. And in that pain, the body struggles to regulate itself. Because love was not only emotion. It was rhythm, pattern, home. But pain has a purpose. It slows you down, forces you to reflect, creates space for the truth to surface among the noise. And little by little, very little by little, the chemistry begins to change. The nervous system trusts again. The world recovers its dimension. And breath by breath, you return not to the life you had, but to the one that awaits you on the other side of liberation. There is still something left. A question, a longing, a need to feel close, even if only in your mind. The addictive nature of obsession. When desire becomes euphoria, you think of them again and again. The image does not fade. The conversation repeats. The silence screams. You tell yourself to stop, but your mind does not listen. This is not just nostalgia. It is obsession, and it works like an addiction. The brain craves patterns, closure, certainty. But obsession feeds on the lack of it, on ambiguity, on the perhaps, on the almost, on the what if, and in the void left by the loss. The mind rushes to fill that space with loops. Obsession hijacks your attention. It narrows your vision. You cannot read a page, watch a program, enter a room without looking for some memory, some sign, some possibility that they also continue thinking about you. But they're not the drug. The sensation is the intensity, the dose, the way the brain lights up when you imagine getting what you want. Although it never happens, fantasy feeds you well. And the more you feed it, the harder it becomes to stop. Obsession mimics hope, but it has roots in fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of losing control. Fear that if you stop thinking about them, they will disappear forever. And then what? What remains of your identity without that desire? You build altars in your mind to conversations, to memories, to futures that never materialized. You overanalyze, decipher, and fantasize, not because it brings you peace, but because it offers a temporary escape. From what? From the emptiness beneath longing. From the truth that closure may never come. From the pain of moving on when a part still clings. And the body plays along. Each thought releases chemical substances. Each flash of their name gives you a hit. And like any addiction, the cycle begins feeding on itself. Even pain becomes familiar. Even pain begins to feel like a test. Proof that the connection mattered. That you have not become insensitive. You cling to the pain because it is something in their absence. So you chase the ghost. You check their profile. You imagine the message. You do not suffer for the person, but for relief. And yet, obsession promises what it cannot fulfill. It keeps you tied to the past while convincing you that you are fighting for love. But love does not look like compulsion. It looks like presence, like calm, like truth. And the truth only emerges when fantasy fades. When you stop asking yourself if they will return and start asking yourself why you still need them to. Because the pain may have nothing to do with them. It may be about that part of you that still believes longing is the only kind of love you can feel. The limits of empathy. When feeling with others is no longer enough, you listen to their story. You feel the weight in their voice, the pain behind their words. Your chest tightens. Your vision blurs. For a moment, you immerse yourself in their pain. That is empathy. The ability to enter another person's world without leaving your own. Feeling with, not just for, but empathy has limits. It is not infinite. It is not perfect. It is shaped by our stories, our prejudices, our capacity. We empathize more easily with those who look like us, who speak like us, who agree with us. Our compassion is reduced when the story is too foreign, too uncomfortable, too threatening to our vision of the world. And when we feel deeply, when the pain is too strong, too frequent, it can be overwhelming. Empathic fatigue is real. The body absorbs what the heart cannot release. Chronic exposure to suffering can cause numbness, exhaustion, even resentment. We walk away not because we have stopped caring, but because we don't know how to bear so much weight. Sometimes we close completely. We create emotional distance as self-protection. We overlook stories that would have moved us before. We read the headlines with dry eyes. And in those moments, it is not because we are insensitive. It is because our nervous system is overwhelmed. There is also a risk of distortion. Sometimes we believe that we are being empathetic when we are really projecting. We imagine how we would feel and confuse that with understanding. We fill the voids with our own fears, assumptions, and pain. We overwrite another person's reality with our own imaginary version of it. Therefore, empathy, although vital, is not always clear, fair, or useful. It requires presence, but also limits. It asks us to witness without drowning, to identify without rewriting another person's story through our own lens. And it cannot exist on its own. Empathy needs to be supported by discernment, humility, and action. Otherwise, it becomes a feeling that passes through us but changes nothing. Sometimes we use empathy to justify premature forgiveness or minimize the damage. We think, I understand why they did it, and confuse that with healing. But understanding is not absolution. Real empathy is a silent art. It is not about rescuing or agreeing. It is about sitting with someone in the middle of their storm without needing to explain the weather. It means asking questions for which we have no answers. It means being with the pain instead of trying to fix it. It means honoring someone's experience, even if it challenges our own, but will not solve everything. Empathy can open the door, but healing, trust, repair, that requires something more difficult. Because even when we understand why someone has hurt us, that does not mean we have truly forgiven them. Do we really forgive? The difference between letting go and forgetting. You say the words, "It's okay. I forgive you." Maybe you even feel it, but something remains. A tension in the chest, a memory that will not calm down. You do not hold a grudge, but you are not free either. So you wonder, did I really forgive them? Forgiveness is praised as something healing, as a strength, as the noblest path. We are told that it frees us, that it is not for the other person, but for ourselves. But sometimes forgiveness feels like pressure, a timeline, a goal that you must cross before you are ready. True forgiveness is more complicated than we admit. It is not a moment. It is a process, a slow unraveling of pain, expectations, and identity. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it never ends. And that does not mean you are broken. It means you are honest. Because to truly forgive, something within us must change. Not only intellectually, but also emotionally. And that change cannot be forced. You can understand someone's reasons, yet continue feeling hurt. You can empathize and still feel betrayed. You can let go of anger, yet continue carrying the scar. Forgiving isn't forgetting. It is remembering in another way. It is revisiting the wound without letting it control you. It is recovering your story without letting theirs define it. It is learning to live in a world where what happened, happened, but no longer belongs to you. And even then, pain can revisit you in a smell, a song, a familiar face. That doesn't mean you have failed. It means that you are human. Some people say, I forgive, but I will never forget. But sometimes we forget too quickly. We say that we have forgiven when we have really minimized, repressed, and denied the complete truth of how deeply it hurt us. True forgiveness makes space for the wound. It does not erase it. It honors the impact before releasing its grip. And sometimes, the most difficult person to forgive is ourselves for what we allowed, for what we lost, for how long we stayed, for not seeing it before, for being human. Forgiveness is not a switch. It is a tide. It recedes, then returns. Some days it feels stronger. Other days you must start again. And maybe that's the point. Not getting rid of the pain, but stopping allowing it to define who we are. Because even after the wound closes, a search for meaning begins. Not in what happened, but in how we carry it onward. The search for meaning. Why? We cannot stop asking ourselves what this is all for. You look at the ceiling, at the window, or at the blue glow of a screen, and somewhere, beneath the noise, a question resonates. What is all this for? The work, the relationships, the rituals, the effort, even suffering. At some point, we all feel a need to give it meaning. We do not want simply to live. We want to matter. Meaning isn't a luxury. It is a psychological need. Without it, life becomes flat, disconnected, a series of tasks without direction, a heartbeat without rhythm. And, nevertheless, meaning feels fragile. It is not given to us. It is built from stories, from connections, from how we interpret pain. And, as it is built, not being given, it can also fall apart. You lose someone. You fail. You see how something you believed in crumbles. And, suddenly, the scaffolding of your purpose collapses. The search begins again. Some find meaning in faith. Others in family, in creativity, in service and love. But it is never something fixed. What anchors us at May 20th seem empty by 40. What seemed deep before May someday seemed like a simple performance. So we search, rebuild, and review the story. And the truth is that we do not need great answers. Sometimes, meaning is found in small rituals. A shared laugh, a long walk, the kindness of a stranger, a fleeting moment of clarity in a day that otherwise would be normal. Meaning has not so much to do with what you do as with how you see it. It is the lens through which life becomes tolerable, beautiful, bearable. But meaning is not always comforting. Sometimes it demands more of us. Sometimes it demands that we face what we would prefer to avoid. Pain, guilt, fear, uncertainty. And even when we believe we have found an answer, life changes. The ground moves, and suddenly, the meaning that sustained us no longer fits. So we start again. Not because we have failed, but because we have changed. Even so, we continue searching. Because meaning makes pain bearable. It does not erase it, but it wraps it in purpose. It gives suffering a form, a direction, a way forward. And beneath that search lies the only truth that we rarely express aloud. We know that this has an end. We know that time is short. And somewhere in that awareness, the next question begins forming. Not only what is life for, but what does death demand of us about how to live? The salience of mortality. When the idea of death changes everything. You see an ambulance pass, a funeral procession, a headline, a diagnosis, and something inside contracts. A shadow crosses your mind. For a moment, you remember that you're going to die. This is the salience of mortality, the psychological experience of remembering your death. It is not the abstract awareness that life ends someday. It is the immediate, visceral recognition that your time is limited, that each breath has a number, that none of this is permanent. And when that awareness arises, something changes. We think that death is paralyzing, but is often clarifying. The trivial disappears. The poses, the pettiness, the noise. What remains is what matters. Who matters? What we would regret not having done. Who we would regret not becoming. The awareness of mortality reorders priorities. It makes us more grateful or desperate, more generous or fearful. It can awaken a purpose or amplify anxiety. It depends on what we believe life means in the first place. Some respond by embracing faith, family, legacy. Others seek distraction, adrenaline, and control. Some feel a renewed reverence. Others fall into a spiral of existential fear. There is no correct way to react, but a reaction always occurs. Because the awareness of death does not whisper. It interrupts. It takes us out of autopilot. It reminds us that every ordinary day is an extraordinary opportunity. And yet, most of us spend our lives trying not to think about it. We scroll through screens. We plan. We fill every space of silence with noise. Not because we are superficial, but because we are afraid. Afraid that, if we slow down, the weight of mortality will catch up. But when we stop running, even for a moment, we begin to see clearly. The fear is not only of death, it is of meaning, of whether we have lived fully, loved deeply, told the truth, left something behind that reflects who we are. The awareness of mortality does not demand panic. It invites us to be present, to live not as if time were infinite, but as if it were precious. Even so, the question persists. If the knowledge of death changes our way of living, on what have we really built our lives? To what structures do we cling when the end always awaits us beyond the horizon? The theory of terror management. How we face the fact of knowing that we're going to die. We walk through life knowing that it is going to end. Every day we carry that awareness, whether we feel it or not. It is integrated in us, in all of us. But we don't talk about it. Not really. We create distractions, routines, identities, not only to live, but to manage the fear that overshadows every breath. This is the essence of the theory of the management of terror, a psychological framework that suggests that much of human behavior, our need for status, our loyalty to culture, our desire to be remembered, is shaped by our fear of death. Because living with full awareness of our mortality would be overwhelming. So we build systems of meaning. We cling to worldviews, beliefs, and roles that promise something beyond the body, something permanent. We align ourselves with religions, nations, movements. We defend our values not only because we believe in them, but because they make us feel immortal by association. The theory holds that when people are reminded of their mortality, they cling more tightly to their beliefs. They become more defensive of their culture, more disdainful of outsiders, more reactive to anything that threatens their worldview. Because if your worldview collapses, so does your shield against death. It is not always obvious. The reaction can be small. A harsh judgment, a defensive comment, the refusal to listen to a different perspective, but something deeper is developing underneath. The need to feel safe in a world that guarantees our disappearance. And here is the paradox. The more we try to suppress the awareness of death, the more it shapes us in the shadows. We accumulate wealth, pursue legacy, strive for greatness. Not only for joy, but for permanence, a way to survive the body, to be more than bones. Even our need to belong takes on new light. Being part of a group, a story, a lineage. These are not only social yearnings. They are existential. They remind us that we are connected, that we will not disappear without a trace. But what if we allow fear to surface? Not to let ourselves be consumed by it, but to understand it. What if a large part of what we do is not only living, but avoiding death? What if that fear is not only psychological? What if it is also biological? What if in the depths of our mind there is not only fear of death, but a silent, strange attraction towards it? Thanos, the impulse of death. The strange attraction towards our own perdition. You surprise yourself sabotaging something good. You do not meet the deadline. You look for a fight. You let the moment pass. And then you ask yourself, why have I done it? This is the enigma that Sigmund Freud tried to solve when he proposed something disturbing. What he called Thanos, the death instinct. A force within the psyche that does not push us towards pleasure, but towards dissolution. Freud saw that not all human behavior could be explained by the desire for survival or gratification. There were recurrent and compulsive moments in which people repeated pain and chose chaos. They took a step towards destruction instead of moving away from it. The death instinct is that force that pushes us. The slow, unconscious drift towards stillness, towards silence, towards returning to a state prior to sensation, prior to being. It is not a desire to die directly. It is more subtle. It manifests itself in self-sabotage, in numbness, in a magnetic attraction of oblivion when things become too bright, too noisy, too intense. It is in the person who disappears just before intimacy. The student who never opens the book, the addict who relapses the day after having progressed, the patterns that seem designed to undo what we have built without understanding why. And the more we repress it, the more it emerges through the cracks. Not because we want to suffer, but because, curiously, suffering sometimes seems safer to us than change, more familiar than joy. The death instinct does not scream. It whispers to us. It tells us that we are tired, that the effort is not worth it, that peace comes from surrendering. It disguises itself as logic, detachment, rest. Some people find it in addiction, others in reckless risk, in cycles of toxic relationships, in the silent impulse to disappear, not as a cry for help, but as slow resignation. The death instinct is not rational. It does not calculate. It murmurs. It pulls. It invites us to return to the void, not with violence, but with tiredness, with pain, to free oneself from the effort. And, nevertheless, it is not entirely destructive because the impulse towards dissolution also reminds us what is worth preserving. It brings the darkness to the surface, not to consume us, but so that we see it, understand it, accept it. It is a force with which one must dance, not obey. We are connected both with Eros and with Thanos, with the vital force and with the death instinct, with the builder and with the destroyer. One pushes us to create, to connect, and to resist. The other tempts us to free ourselves, to withdraw, to fall apart. And in that tension, we live. To deny one is to misinterpret the other. Creation means nothing without the possibility of destruction. Joy means little without the shadow of sadness. Perhaps the goal is not to silence the death instinct, but to learn its language. To listen to the moments in which we long to disappear and ask ourselves what part of us is tired of being here. The self as fiction, the story we tell to keep ourselves whole. You look at yourself in the mirror and call it you. A name, a face, a timeline, a favorite color, a list of memories. You say, "This is what I am." But who writes that story? The self feels solid, coherent, singular. But under that illusion, there is something far more fluid. The self is not a fixed entity. It is a narrative, a story that your mind builds to make sense of all the inner chaos. You weren't born with it. It was built from family, culture, praise, and punishment. You absorb the language, the roles, the expectations. You learned what to hide, what to emphasize, what to repeat until it seemed true. And the more the story was reinforced, the more people said, "Yes, that's you." The more real it began to seem. But it's still a story. It is edited. It forgets. It adds meaning a posteriori. It softens the contradictions, reshapes the discomfort, writes continuity where it did not exist. Because the brain craves coherence. It does not want a collection of fragmented experiences. It wants a protagonist, a common thread, a self. So it invents one. And most of the time that fiction works. It gives us identity, stability, direction. It tells us what to pursue, what to fear, what to protect. It anchors us in time and space. But it also limits us. Because when the story becomes too rigid, it becomes a cage, a script from which we cannot deviate, a set of rules that we must obey to remain ourselves. You could say, "I'm not one of those people." But what if you are? What if that's just a cliche that you've never questioned? And what happens when something breaks the story? A trauma, a transformation, a loss so deep that it undoes who you thought you were. Suddenly, the narrative fragments and the self begins to blur. That moment is scary, but can also be sacred. Because if the self is a story, then perhaps you are allowed to rewrite it, not with lies, but with honesty, with freedom, with the recognition that you were never just one thing. You were never meant to fit into a single form. And once that possibility opens up, once you glimpse how constructed yourself has always been, you begin to understand why the mind clings so strongly to its story and how much it fears the alternative, a self without a center, only questions. The need for coherence, why we fear falling apart. You tell yourself a story to sleep. You repeat it in the morning to remember who you are. It doesn't matter if it's messy, as long as it stays together. This is coherence, the deep psychological need for a self that makes sense. We don't just want to exist. We want our existence to feel unified, to believe that who we were yesterday coincides with who we are today, and that it points to who we will be tomorrow. When that line breaks, something inside us panics. Because coherence is more than comfort. It is a survival strategy. When your life makes sense, Your emotions are manageable. Your past seems useful. Your identity feels intact. You can move through the world with a course, even if that course is uncertain. But when coherence falters after a trauma, a failure, a contradiction, or grief, the self begins to fragment, and suddenly, you not only lose your balance, you lose the sensation of being someone. We respond by looking for a narrative. We explain, we justify, we reformulate. We say things like, everything happens for a reason, or this has made me who I am. Not because it is always true, but because it keeps the common thread intact. We even revise the memory to protect the story. We forget the parts that don't fit. We emphasize what makes sense. We remodel the moments, not to deceive, but to survive. And when others contradict our narrative, we react not only with disagreement, but with defensiveness. Because questioning someone's story of himself is like threatening his foundations. That is why we resist change. That is why we cling to labels. That is why we avoid looking too closely at the parts of ourselves that we do not understand. Coherence gives us peace, but it can also trap us. Because when the story becomes more important than truth, we stop growing. We stop listening. We stop being. Even so, the need for coherence does not disappear. We long for a common thread, a meaning, a center. And when we don't find it in this life, we start looking beyond. Beyond the body, beyond the timeline, beyond the last breath, towards something that doesn't break when we do. Our secret longing for immortality, the silent hope of not disappearing without further ado. You blow out the candles. Another year has passed. You leaf through old photos and feel something you can't name. A silent pain, because everything is moving further away. Under the goals, the plans, the achievements, there's a whisper. I don't want to be forgotten. It is the longing for immortality, not the fantasy of living forever. Exactly, but the deepest desire that something of us endures, that our story does not end in silence. We pursue it in subtle ways in art, in legacy, in the names we give our children, in the marks we try to leave on others. We build monuments, biographies, chronologies, anything to survive the body. But it's not just about the world remembering us. It is about remaining intact in our own minds. It is about feeling real, continuous, permanent. Because death is not only scary, but destabilizing. Not only does it stop the body, but threatens narrative. What has all this been for if it ends here? And thus we imagine futures in which we continue existing. Where does our presence endure? Where does our image, our voice, our impact survive, even in memory, even if only in data form? Religion responds to this by promising something beyond this life. Science responds with cryonics, simulation, and DNA. But beneath both hides the same longing, not to be erased, but to know our existence mattered enough to resist disappearance. And yet, this longing can silently shape everything. It can turn relationships into performances, work into monuments, and life into legacy management. Because when permanence becomes the goal, the present seems like rehearsal. You start curating your story instead of living fully. You look for meaning in everything, not for its own sake, but to ensure it endures. You speak less from truth and more from the desire to resonate beyond your time. But perhaps immortality does not come from being remembered. Perhaps it comes from how deeply they feel us, from moments that change another's inner world in a way they can't fully explain. Perhaps true life after death remains in the invisible traces we leave, in gestures of kindness and courage transmitted through stories that no one will know began with us. Perhaps it is not about fame, statues, or pages of history. Perhaps it is about the resonance of that part of you that lives on in the laughter you gave a child, in the comfort you offered a friend, and in the idea you shared that planted a seed in someone else's future. And yet, even that thought, even that comfort, points to something deeper. We don't want just to be remembered. We want to believe that we were here for a reason, and that reason, in some way, could still be alive. The will to leave a mark is what leads us beyond ourselves. You write the book, plant a tree, create a company, raise a child, say what you've been waiting to say. You don't do it just for yourself, but for something larger. Because deep down, we want to leave a mark. It's not always something great. Sometimes it's subtle. A moment when you change someone's day, a gesture that lasted beyond that moment, a kindness that no one asked for, but that no one has forgotten. We long to be part of something that extends beyond us, and that matters not only now, but later. To be more than a fleeting name, more than fading memories. It is not ego. It is legacy. It is the longing to shape the world in some way before leaving. It is seen in art, activism, innovation, and the silent work of care. All of this is an effort to leave behind something that says, I was here, and it meant something, because in a universe where time erodes everything, impact feels like resistance. But the will to leave a mark can take many forms. Some build empires, others plant gardens. Some seek recognition, others work in silence. Some strive to change the world, others focus on changing a single life. And none of it is vain. Even the smallest trace, a transmitted story, a remembered lesson, a smile that lives in another's joy, can extend far beyond its moment. However, this can be distorted. When impact becomes obsession, when legacy becomes pressure, when the desire to be remembered eclipses being alive, we begin to measure our worth by what we produce. We begin to treat existence as a race against oblivion. But the footprint that matters most isn't always visible. Sometimes it is not what we build, but how we were. The courage we showed, the honesty with which we lived, the kindness we offered when no one else did. We want to be engraved in something. Stone, stories, someone's bones. Because something in us believes that to be forgotten is to never matter. But perhaps the deepest footprint isn't engraved in history. Perhaps it is felt now, in the present. And perhaps that longing to leave something behind is only the beginning of another impulse. One that does not aim for permanence, but it's something even more difficult to achieve. Transcendence. The impulse toward transcendence. Reaching beyond what is the self. You are still, but something inside you moves upward. A force that you cannot name. A longing not for more things, but for something higher. Something that rises above survival, success, and the self. This is transcendence. The impulse to go further, beyond your history, beyond your name, beyond the loop of wanting, getting, and wanting again. It is what makes you stop before a sunset, be silent in the presence of beauty, and cry at a musical piece that you cannot explain. It is the part of you that wants not only to win, but to dissolve, merge, be part of something vast. Transcendence is not escape. It is expanding. It is what we seek when the limits of identity become too narrow for us. When our roles seem like costumes. When achievements cease to satisfy us. We seek something that elevates us above the ordinary, that reconnects us with wonder, meaning, and admiration. Some find it in nature, others in art, in adoration, in meditation, in acts of radical service, in moments in which the self is no longer the center, but a recipient. And in those moments, something opens. You feel small, but not insignificant, brief, but not empty, a spark in something infinite. And, curiously, that awareness does not diminish you. It stabilizes you because the impulse to transcend isn't a rejection of oneself. It is a reach toward fullness. But this impulse can also get out of control when we pursue transcendence through power, control, the ego disguised as illumination. When the need to rise above others replaces the impulse to dissolve into something shared. True transcendence is humble. It does not shout. It does not seek applause. It is silent, sometimes invisible, but when it arrives, everything changes. You stop needing to be the protagonist. You begin to see yourself as a thread in a much larger fabric. And you wonder if something so vast exists. Where has it come from? Who or what has designed the pattern in which you were woven? And why do we continue creating stories that point towards something divine? Why do we create gods that give shape to the infinite? You sit in silence, looking at the stars. Something stirs. It is not a thought, but a feeling. The sensation that this immensity is not only emptiness, that something observes or listens or simply is. From the beginning, we have looked up and asked ourselves why. And when the wonder became too great to express it with words, we gave it form. We molded mystery into faces, stories, voices, gods, not only to control the world, but to understand it, to explain why we are here, to anchor chaos, to create meaning where there was only noise. The gods gave structure to what was incomprehensible. They made death less definitive and pain less absurd. They turned nature into narrative, randomness into intention. We didn't just adore them. We needed them, not only as creators, but as mirrors. Our gods carried our fears, hopes, and longings. They punished what we feared within ourselves. They blessed what we dreamed of becoming. They were cosmic reflections, elevated versions of our most human traits. But creating gods wasn't just about fear or power. It was about intimacy, relationship, and the desire to be known by something infinite, to matter in the eyes of the eternal. We created gods in our image because we needed them to feel familiar, to walk beside us in our confusion, to whisper comfort to us through parables and prayers, to wrap our chaos in order and our impotence in meaning. And even now, in a secular era, we have not stopped. We continue building temples. Only now they're digital, cultural, political. We deify celebrities, ideologies, even algorithms. We invent superior powers from systems and symbols because something in us still wants to believe that there's an order above our own. We long for the feeling that someone is watching over us, that suffering has a witness, that love resonates beyond this moment, because the alternative, that everything is meaningless, random, silent, is too heavy to carry alone. So we continue to shape the divine, not because we know it, but because we need it, to contain our pain, to witness our joy, to forgive what we cannot fix, to love something too big to lose. Even those who say they have no faith still speak the language of longing. They continue to kneel in some way before the immensity of time, the mystery, the connection. They continue to seek answers in beauty, in justice, in the pain of being understood. Whether the gods exist beyond us or only within us may be irrelevant, because sometimes the mere fact of aspiring to something more is what keeps us grounded. And believing in something higher, even if only for a moment, may be what allows us to live with everything we cannot understand. Thank you for joining me on this long, winding journey into the hidden architecture of what drives us. If something in this video has made you think, challenged some of your beliefs, or made you feel a little more human, consider supporting this channel. Leave a comment and share what you liked most. Give it a like if you think it has been worth it. And if you want to continue exploring together, please subscribe. There is much more to discover, and you will always be welcome here.